Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our new resource implementation. We welcome you who is here on site. We do have about 40 of you here today joining us, and we also have a few folks joining WebEx. So this hybrid meeting, we are kicking off with a lot of agenda items that our manager, Kelsey, will go over, but I do have some housekeeping reminders for those who are on site as well for those who are in the WebEx queue. So for today, we have this call being recorded as well for the information that we have posted on the website on public forums. Just a reminder, any related transcriptions should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. We encourage to keep comments brief and professional. As well, we also ask for those to not repeat any comments previously said. If you like, we can always talk to you offline and also talk to you after the meeting, but that way we can continue on with our presentations. If you do experience technical issues for those who are on the WebEx, feel free to message my event producer, Silas, and then they will be able to help you. For any questions that are for those who are on site, make sure you use that handheld device that's in the front of you. The green button will allow you to know that you're on, but we would like for you to raise your hand, and that way we could call on you. But also very important, when you do speak, make sure you state your full name and your affiliation. We also remind you, if you do forget, we want to make sure folks that are on the WebEx know who's speaking. So please be sure to state your full name and organization that you're representing. For the virtual attendees, you'll be asked to use the raise hand icon located in the lower toolbar. And to ask a question, you can also submit it through the chat. We'll be monitoring the chat throughout the meeting. And we'll also ask that you also provide your organization name as well. And then if there's any questions, let us know. We'll kind of be helping out with like any questions here. So let's get to the next one. And then for the WebEx also, when you do ask a question, it does lock you. So that way for the WebEx tool, make sure you don't unmute yourself until you're done with your question. But other than that, we'll get started. I think that's my last slide, and we'll go share our screen, Silas, and then I'll pass it on to Kelsey.
All right, well, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. It's great to see you all, some of you here, and appreciate everybody joining us remotely as well. My name is Kelsey Ajax. I'm the manager of model and contract implementation. I oversee a few folks that you'll hear from today, including our new resource implementation group and our energy data acquisition specialists, our EDAS team. We're really excited to be here and just wanted to share some helpful tips to get you through the process, and hopefully we can all learn and collaborate on some of these things together. I joined MCI late last year, worked in the control center and real-time ops for about the past 9 years. And since joining, our team in MCI has just discussed the enormous challenge that we've all been faced with the fact that just the sheer number of resources now that we're having to onboard has grown exponentially. The increased complexity that we've been seeing from new technologies and just different combinations of that we're allowing to try to make it so that we can best and reliably manage the grid. And so with that, we felt like we really need more collaboration with our stakeholders. We need more opportunities to hear feedback from you, for you guys to hear tips and tricks from us, for clarifications that we can make. And so we thought it would be a good opportunity to host an event like this where we can share, like I said, some tips and tricks, make sure that you guys have the right expectations for requirements, timelines, know that we are shifting our focus to be a little bit stricter about these requirements going forward because of the increase that we're seeing. We just have to be able to maintain the grid reliably. But with that said, we know that this is a really complex situation that we're all in, and the whole process is difficult. There's been requiring a lot of back and forth. And so we want to do what we can to work together to try to make this a little more efficient and easier for us all. So today for our agenda, you're going to hear from our new resource implementation group. They're going to go through the NRI process with you, share some tips and tricks, kind of give like high level, why are we asking for the things that we're asking and what do they relate to, so they maybe sink in and make a little bit more sense. We're also going to talk about some improvements we have going forward. After that, our energy data acquisition specialists are going to share some of the metering and telemetry requirements, some improvements that we're looking at there, tips and tricks to make it more efficient, and then also discuss some telemetry non-compliance expectations. After that, you'll hear from our operations policy and analytics group, and he's going to discuss our battery storage primary frequency response settings. He'll walk through some examples, what we've been seeing from resources, and what we expect to see, and why that impacts us in the control center. Lastly, you're going to hear from one of our lead generation dispatchers, and he's going to take you through, once you hit sync, what kind of communications should you be having with the control center? What our expectations are for performance, for metering and telemetry, what we want that OMS card to look like. And, you know, during all of these conversations, I hope that you ask questions, you know, encourage feedback and all of that. So please, this should be an engaging, collaborative session as much as possible during lunchtime, and we'll have an hour at the end in which we can meet and greet. We can discuss ways that we can improve our systems, and, you know, any questions that you have, or just to meet and say hi. You know, we don't get opportunities like this very often to meet in person. So I'm really looking forward to meeting you all. And before I kick it off to our NRI team, I am going to pass it over to Heidi. She's our lead customer education trainer, and she's got a few things to share about future learning opportunities, as well as some resources that can potentially help you guys through the process.
Thanks, Kelsey. Thanks, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for letting me steal a couple of minutes. I'm really grateful to Kelsey for letting us come and share this. We are going to be having training. It's kind of our summer readiness kickoff training this May. We do have 4 sessions, and I'm here to plug this because really what our focus is are you, the resource operators and owners. Our external training typically deals with our scheduling coordinators, but like Kelsey said, there's a lot more complexity now, a lot more resources. So we are going to be holding a series of trainings about resource performance expectations. So that class is next Tuesday. And we hope that you will register for that. We also have a battery performance expectations class. There's a lot more complexity around batteries right now. So we're going to try to address some of those, managing intertie connections on May 16th. And then we do have a course for our WEIM participants on the 22nd. So you can see the topics that we're going to be covering in each one of those. So there is a link to register, and you can go to our website as well. But we do hope that you will share this information with your staff, get them to participate, because it's really talking about how do you interact with your scheduling coordinators to maintain that market efficiency as well as grid reliability. We also wanted to announce this new tool that we're just posting today, and it is our Resource Owner Operators Desk Reference Guide. So like we mentioned before, the training that we've done are for our scheduling coordinators, not really for our resource operators and owners. So we put together this kind of interactive desk reference guide that has links to different training resources we have, our computer-based training courses, knowledge articles, policies and procedures, some of these links that you'll see in the presentations throughout the day to the NRI documents. So this is going to be a living document. It's posted on our Learning Center, and it's also going to be posted on the NRI site. We highly encourage you to start looking at those training materials so that you get a better idea of what are the expectations of performing with the ISO? What are the, what do we expect as far as resource response, communications, informing the market of what your resources are capable of at that moment. So this is going to be a tool that will continue to grow as we continue to partner with the NRI team. and as we continue to develop out a training program for the new resource owners. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, please contact us at customerreadiness@caiso.com, and we're happy to go over any kind of training questions that you have. All right, with that, thank you.
No, you're good. Okay, next we do have in our agenda our new resource implementation meeting. So we have Andrew and Chandra.
All right. My name is Andrew Brown. I am the lead or the operations coordinator lead for NRI. And then this is Chandra Wagner. We will be kind of going over the NRI process and then also just talking through some of the issues that we're seeing with the NRI process as it happens right now. So just a couple items for housekeeping. If you're on the phone, if you could keep yourself muted. Also in the room, the mics, if you could keep yourself muted. You can ask questions either verbally or through the chat. And then you can raise your hand if you want to do any questions or anything. We will be pausing kind of throughout the presentation to answer some questions kind of at the end of each section. So if you could hold your questions until we ask for them. So one of the things we wanted to talk about today is like, what are the goals of the NRI process? What are we trying to achieve at the ISO? And then what are some of the issues that we're seeing that are impacting our ability to reach these goals? And then also, how can you as the customer, how can we together reach these goals in a efficient manner? So the other thing we're going to talk about are kind of the current standards and processes, how we're currently doing the NRI process, which would include like how to start the project, what we're looking for in a project that's ready to start, some of the deliverables, the timelines, what needs to be done in a certain order and able to breach the milestones of the project. And then we're going to look ahead to the future, some of the improvements that we're looking to make in the NRI process to make it more efficient and also more helpful for you, the customer. All right. So first part here of the NRI process goals and the impacts. So we'll look through what our goals are. And so our main goal is to efficiently implement reliable resources into the CAISO market through effective resource validation and integration. And so basically, we're just verifying that the information provided is accurate and reflects what's going on with the resource itself, following our FERC, NERC, CAISO tariff, and the BPMs. And so our main goal through all of this is to make sure that the resources are going to be operating reliably in the market. Reliability is our #1 goal. So following through that, we're going to be looking for the customers to provide clear information. And then we also want to make sure that we're providing clear requests for what information we need. And that's a back and forth that we expect to have through the NRI process. And then we also want to manage a fair environment where the resources as they're coming through know what is expected of them and are being equitably treated throughout the process. And so we're committed to moving these projects in an orderly manner from the initial NRI request all the way through commercial operation. Okay. Looking at the current situation, currently where we're at, we have a huge number of projects that are coming into the NRI process. And as you can see from this graph, this is a cumulative megawatt amounts that we've onboarded or are expecting to onboard. And you can see there's a pretty dramatic increase. Again, these are megawatts, so this doesn't count the number of projects that are entering. And that's one of the items that we're seeing is with a lot of queue numbers that come through. It's a single queue number, but it might be broken out into 2, 4, 8 projects, and each project has its own set of requirements. It has to meet all the BPM and tariff requirements individually, and so that creates a tremendous increase in the amount of work. And then along with all those projects coming in and being a single queue, but then having multiple resources operating in the same point of interconnection, the complexity is getting a lot, the projects are getting more complex. And so all of these we recognize are required. Like, we need this based on the increase in the energy demands and then also the resource adequacy requirements that we have. And we also recognize that the timelines are kind of being crunched. We have for quarter 2023, and then with those reliability requirements, resources need to come on, as soon as they can. So we're aware of the outer environments, and we are taking that into account. So part of that outreach that we're doing is trying to have these kind of meetings where we can talk through, here's what we're looking for, here's some of the things that we think we can improve on together, and then how can we get those implemented so that everybody has an easier time going through this process. So some of the things, talking about, we have a large number of projects and the requirements for those projects. So we want to talk about what is needed before you're starting the NRI process. And so the first thing that you would need is an executed interconnection agreement. That we have to have that to start the process. We wouldn't want to have any open MMAs or anticipated MMAs during the NRI process. And what that means is we don't want where like you're changing the inverters or you're changing the configuration of the substation and the way the resources are connecting, transformers, major equipment like that. We generally want the projects, when they start the NRI process, they should be construction ready. And so that's what we're looking for, to reduce times where we have confusion on what needs to be modeled or what the metering configurations are, or even just the configuration of the resources themselves. So along with that, if you can review the full network model schedule and the bucket timelines to ensure that your project schedule is feasible. One of the things that we're kind of noticing is a lot of people are trying to compress the timelines by asking for expedited reviews of documents or making assumptions that they can cut down a review time from 10 days to 2 days. And those things they're not always possible. And so we want to make sure that we're clear with developers, resource owners, when you're doing your schedule, please do not count on expedited reviews or escalations in order to reach your project milestones. All of this, we're doing because we want to make sure that it's a straightforward a process for all of us as we can reach. And so, working through these items up front makes it for a more straightforward process on the back end. And so the other thing that we want to kind of talk about is that when you're achieving CAISO commercial operation approval, when you get that COD approval, that means your resource is ready to operate in the market. So when you request COD, you are saying my resource is ready to operate in the market. We have everything completed. We're ready to enter into the market and start operating. So we want to make sure that people are aware of that. I think sometimes the construction and contractual schedules don't always line up. And then there's also the resource adequacy timelines. Those are not factored into the NRI process. So we'll talk a little bit more about resource adequacy later, but we want to make sure we bring that up, that's a separate process from the NRI process. Okay, so before starting the NRI process, looking through your timelines for how long it will take, and the basic takeaway is that your mileage may vary. The timelines vary based on the project complexity, what type of project it is. There's so many things that go into the amount of time it takes to complete a project in the NRI process. We generally see 6 to 9 months being a comfortable timeline where items can be achieved without, I want to say, a lot of frustration or timelines being crunched. So, and one of the things to keep in mind is that there's various items that lead to the amount of time it takes to review a project, especially in the NRI. That you could have different projects have different business unit review requirements. They have different document requirements, and those documents have review timelines. So it really does vary, but we hold tight to between 6 and 9 months is a comfortable amount of time to budget for the NRI process. Okay, and I will turn it over to Chandra. Yes, questions. Are there any questions? No questions? All right. You're an easy bunch if you don't have questions. All right.
Hi, I'm Chandra Wagner. I just recently started with the California ISO. I've been working on running projects through this process from the customer side. So I'm excited to share our NRI process with you guys today and answer any questions that you have, because I know how, from experience, how frustrating it can be. I will be behind the screen a little bit. Oh, it looks like there was a question.
We'll come back to that
Okay.
after you're done.
So I might be hiding for a little bit. You might not see me. I'm a little short. But today, my section, I'm going to take you through high level idea of the flow of NRI process. So a lot of the times we just think of like that NRI guide or the NRI checklist, and I want to kind of put it in a different perspective for everybody today and show like what is going on besides just the besides just thinking of items on a checklist. So everybody should be pretty familiar with this one. This is our high-level interconnection process map. It's not too detailed. We're gonna dig into it a little bit deeper, but as you can see, you start ISO interconnection request, go to the interconnection study through the interconnection agreement, and that is when you start NRI. And during that, all of your design and your permitting and your engineering is going on. So we're going to go a little bit deeper. So we're zooming in on this ISO, new resource implementation portion. And we are going to talk about these in a little bit more detail. Starting with the types of projects that you need, going through RIM's creation process, all the way through all of the buckets, and just to kind of show what is going on during this process besides just submitting deliverables. What do those deliverables do? What is the purpose of this process? What is the purpose of something like a GRDT? How is it used? And what are we doing with it? So we are going to go through getting started.
Okay, I think we'll go back and check the questions.
The chat.
I think they'll read the.
Yeah. Hey, Silas, can you go ahead and read out the questions? The first one's from Joanne from Ava Energy.
Yep, absolutely. Joni asks, if there's a required change to the equipment or system, how long will that MMA add to the NRI 6 through 9 month timeline?
Okay, I think I might turn that over to Jason Foster. If Jason, if you want to answer that question.
Sure thing. Good morning, Andrew. Good morning, everybody. So it's semi-dependent on the request, the complexity of the request, and the amount of other work and volume of other projects currently being requested. In the interconnection process enhancements initiative that we've been going through for the past year or so, we're proposing and adding language into the BPM to clarify, into the generator management BPM to clarify that if there is a modification request submitted during or at the same time as the NRI process, you know, it's more specific to the limited operations study, but semi-specific also to the NRI process, where the modification request at a minimum must be valid to proceed through those processes. And the reason we are looking at the validation of those MMAs is the first point of it is then the models are at least validated. And then for the NRI process, we're looking at having completed and approved MMAs to ensure that that there's no issues with the technical changes that are proceeding through the NRI process. And so from a timeline perspective, to answer your question, it really depends on the amount of time that the MMA is going to take, you know, from validation and then through the study process.
The next
Yeah, so that
question
kind
is, sorry.
Go ahead.
The next question is from Danny Zeminski. He says, hello, you mentioned COD. Are you going to discuss the KISO effective dates and in-service / backfeed dates?
Yep, we'll be covering that later on in the presentation.
And the final one in chat is from Kelsey Gormley. She says, inverter equipment types change all the time. The inverters approved in an LGIA that was executed years prior are often previous generations of equipment that have changed by the time we get to construction. Even if we are looking at the same number of inverters or types of inverters, it may just be a Gen 2 versus Gen 3 situation. Would appreciate additional clarity from queue management on what inverter changes are material from an interconnection agreement perspective and what is not.
Andrew, I suppose that one's for me. Yeah,
Yep,
Kelsey, good question. Really, when it comes down to it, if we're talking black and white, I would say any inverter changes, even if it's Gen 2 to Gen 3, are going to require a modification request to ensure that the KISO has the right model data and inverter data and specifics or technical specifics or specifications is the word I was looking for, on file and on record to ensure that we're modeling everything properly.
Okay.
That's
Do we have
all
any other questions?
That's all the questions we have in queue at this time.
All right, thank you. Okay, so we'll move on to section 3. So how do we start a project? And so we're going to talk a little bit through here about determining your timeline, how to start that process, and then the process depending on what type of project you have, and then we'll also talk a little bit about RIMS access. So there we go. All right, so the first thing we're going to talk about is determining your timeline. And one of the main timeline items that cannot be changed, like the dates can't be circumvented, there aren't any workarounds or intermodel deployments, those things don't happen, would be the full network model build schedule. And so this is posted on the network and resource modeling page, and they post them generally the next year, so 2025 will be posted in this mid-June to July timeframe. We're finalizing it right now, so it should probably be posted a little bit sooner. than that normal timeline. But this will show all of the model deployments for the next year. And so from here, what you'll want to do is look at the earliest possible sync date, which is that last box, and match that up with when you intend to reach sync for your project. And you'll want to pick a model build that is after, or that earliest project creation implementation date is, is before your sync date. And so that date could be a couple months before, it could be a couple model builds before. We would encourage you to put your project into the earliest model build you can, because the model builds are generally done on a first come, first served type basis. So we haven't had it for a while, but it can happen where there are more projects than there's resources allocated for the model build. So it's something to keep in mind that we always encourage people to submit their projects to target an earlier model build than what they actually need. So in this case, you would pick your date. And so let's say you were going to reach sync on June 1 is what your intended sync date was. So if we pick that date, we have May 28th, which is the 24-month 5 model build. And so that's the model build that the last model build we would be able to be included in and still reach that sync target date. So if we have all of our documents ready, we could do the 24-month 3 model build to make sure that we're way ahead of the game, don't have any issues where we're scrambling at the last minute for any kind of approvals or anything. So we can choose that 24-month 3 model build, and that means that all of our documents have to be accepted. I shouldn't say all of it. All of our bucket 1 documents have to be accepted by December 27th. So what happens is you will submit all of your documents. They'll be accepted or not accepted. There'll be kind of an iterated process where if there's any deficiencies in the documents, you'll be notified you can resubmit new documents. All of those documents have to be accepted by December 27th. So then the ISO compiles all of the documents that were assigned to that model scope, the 24-month 3 model build, and we push them into the scope and determine how many hours is it going to take to complete all of this modeling work. How many man hours do we have as far as to be able to complete these projects? And then determine if there's anything that we can't accommodate. Do we push that to the next model scope? Do we delay the model production deployment date? There's different items that might come up. But generally, the ISO will publish the model scope on, in this case, for the 24-month 3 model build. They'll publish it January 17th. It'll be posted to the network and resource modeling page. You'd be able to see that your project was included. RIMS will also update to show what model build you're in. And then if you, let's say you have an issue and we miss the 24-month 3 deadline because one of our documents, we didn't get it accepted in time. There's still an opportunity for you to do a late model scope request. And I want to emphasize the word request. You are not just saying, we missed the deadline and now we want to be in this scope. It's a request. There's a form that has to be filled out. It has to go up to a vice president level from your company to get approval, along with the business reason for why you have to be in this model build as opposed to the next model build. But those requests are processed as they're received, and they may or may not be accommodated. It depends on the complexity of the project and when it's received. So late scope requests, it is something that can happen, but it shouldn't be, I want to say it shouldn't be like a pattern where all of your projects, you're like, well, we don't have to worry about that customer model document submission deadline because they have the late scope process. So we can just do this later. So the next item that we'll look at then is the production deployment, and that is when the model will go live. So that is when the full network model is deployed into our real-time systems. And Chandra will talk a little bit more about what that means as far as your bucket items, but it's another production deployment date to keep in mind when the model is going to go live. There we go. Okay. Another item to keep in mind are the resource adequacy timelines. So if your resource is going to be participating in RA, you're going to need to consider your RA application timelines and deadlines. The projects must be COD before you can submit your RA applications for NQC and EFC. So you can see from here that if going back to that original idea, we had a June 1 sync date, and maybe we're looking to target COD in July. If I was going to be selling this resource for RA, I can see that if my resource is COD in July, that the earliest I would be able to participate in RA would be September. And so that's just kind of something to keep in mind, is that those deadlines are generally 45 days before the beginning of the month. It's a 2-week process in order for them to complete the RA before you would be able to show up in a supply plan. So it's something to keep in mind. Those dates are outside of the NRI process, but something to keep in mind as you're building your project timeline. Okay, so now we've kind of figured out our timeline, and now we need to figure out what process we're going to use to get our resource into the ISO market. So for all new resources that are entering the CAISO market, you would be going through the RIMS process projects. And so that is through RIMS. So that's your new resources, whether they're a CAISO metered entity or an SC metered entity. If it's a dynamic transfer, a dynamic or pseudo tie, the QF conversions, and then if you have a meter maintenance or rig project, they also go through the RIMS process. The other process is the NRI inbox. We're not going to talk about that. That's just for essentially metering projects. Okay, so how do we start this RIMS process? So the first thing we're going to do is we determined our project type, and we know we need to go through the RIMS process. We're going to go to the NRI webpage. There will be a project details form that you'll need to fill out. There's a section that lists like the RIMS process for filling out these forms. And then you'll need to upload that project details form into the RIMS software system itself. And so that's just a website that you can go to. We have a quick start guide, which will help you get started with the process of filling out the project details form, getting it submitted into RIMS so that you can complete that process. So going through that process, once you have your project created, you'll get an email with a project number. You're going to need to reach out to your UAA, the company's UAA, give them that project number. They'll have to reach out to the ISO to have that project assigned to them as the UAA for your company, and then your UAA would need to provide you with access to the project. So if there's any changes that you need to make to the project, you would just do that through RIMS. If you need to update people on the email distribution list, you can do that through RIMS. If there's some other change that you might need to make, you can generally make those changes within RIMS. If there's something that you need to change that you're not able to change, you can also email the NRI inbox and request our assistance with that. So just to recap, because we kind of sometimes people get tripped up on this. Your UAA, the user access administrator for the new project, they need to request access from the CAISO before they can assign access to you. So that's an important step. If you have any questions, we have the information here as far as how to reach out to the user access administrator for more information. All right, so are there any questions?
So we did get one question in the chat asking if NRI is okay with projects targeting or requesting to enter an early model build. We are okay with projects trying to enter an early model build, but keep in mind it's better to target your bucket 1 submittal and all of your modeling documents for an early model build. That way, if you miss that date, no harm, no foul. If you wait until the later later model build, then you could be pushing out your schedule up to like a month.
Silas, can you read if there's any other questions for us?
Danny Zeminski asks, when you submit the FNM before sync date, is that the KISO effective date? See, we are about to discuss buckets. The NRI project details form has the KISO effective date and is in bucket 1. Is that when the KISO effective date is approved then, or later in bucket 3 with the SC letters?
Okay, so I think I'm gonna maybe try to get clarification. When we're talking about the effective date, I think you might be referring to the SC effective date, the Scheduling Coordinator Association effective date. So that would be something that you would determine when you're in your bucket 3 timeline. Oh, okay. Is this it's clarification? It's an EIM question. Oh, okay. Yeah, we will, Danny, I will reach out to you later afterwards. We're trying to focus just on the KISO BA processes. So it's a little bit different as far as the process for the WEIM versus the KISO BA. So we'll take down your information and we will reach out to you later today to discuss that.
And Danny was from SRP. Just for folks that are on the call, please be sure to state your full affiliation. The next question we have from Mariana from Avantis. Go ahead, Silas.
Mariana asks, to confirm my understanding, to count for RA, the project must be 2 weeks before the plan submission due date and after the project has COD'd.
Yeah, so we're going to touch on that process a little bit later here, but essentially the project has to be COD before you can request the NQC and EFC review, and that review process can take 2 weeks. So that's what, as far as the timeline, that's what we're saying is that you would reach COD and then request that NQC and EFC review, and then that process can take up to 2 weeks to complete. So, and we'll touch on that a little bit later. We have another slide that goes into that.
Danny and Mariana both said thank you, and that's all the questions we have in chat at this time.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to explain how this next section is going to work before we get too deep into it. You're going to see a lot of information on the slides. That is there more for reference purposes. At the afterwards, everyone will have access to these slides, or they're already up on the website, so you should be able to look at all the slides from today's presentation. But I will be using the pointer and annotation to kind of focus the attention on what we're discussing. We're going to talk about the buckets and deliverables process in a slightly different way than normal. Instead of just going bucket 1, bucket 2, bucket 3, we're going to talk about, like I said earlier, what each of these processes are doing, how they interact, what those deliverables get to. So starting off, buckets 1 through 2. I call this the modeling assignment bucket. So we've already created our RIMS project. So we've done our RIMS creation project. We're moving into bucket 1 and trying to get our project or our resource assigned a model build. So we're going to go dive into what's happening there. I say this is bucket 1 through 2 because you will be submitting bucket 1. You want that to get approved by that submission deadline, and then you're also going to be working on your bucket 2 at the same time. So this flowchart right here just shows what we're doing at a high level view when you submit your bucket 1 documents. There's a list of all the bucket 1 deliverables that you may need. Some of these wouldn't apply to all projects, but they would apply to some projects might need to submit all of these. The submissions in bucket 1 are going to are going to dictate how CAISO is going to model your resource. So it's super important that we make sure that what we are submitting is accurate, matches our LGIA or our IA, whether you have a 3-party, 2-party agreement, and that you are trying not to do any changes. Whatever you submit in bucket 1, that should be ready for construction. We're going to start, this is the design that we're going with. That is how we are going to model it into our system. So once you submit it, there is this 15-day business day review period, 10 to 15 business days to review. And if there are any mistakes and we have to send it back, then there may be a restart of that timeline. So make sure that you are looking at your QC process. We have a lot of guides and checklists out there on our website, and Idas will be talking about some of those later on. So make sure that you're checking that. Check the NRI guide. Check the guides that we have available for our single lines and 3 lines, so that you are following the metering guidelines. And then once that is accepted and you have all of your model submission documents accepted, then like Andrew was describing earlier, we build the scope. This is when any late changes would be allowed to be requested. And then CAISO assigns the model build. And what CAISO is doing when we assign the model build is we're updating all of our internal databases to make sure that our databases are ready for your project. So that is why we have to make sure that we can't, if you miss the late scope request, if you miss the model build submission deadline, that is why you have to, we can't circumvent those dates. Was there a question?
This is Steve Shoemaker from the CPUC. Andrew had mentioned that sometimes when it goes from the queue to the NRI process, it can kind of splinter off, right, into, different resource IDs with different generating units. Is that when that happens, what you're describing right now?
So that would actually happen during the RIMS creation process. So when you're creating, you create the projects. If you need to split projects from the queue number, then you would create multiple projects. They get their project codes, ISO project codes, and then they would submit all their bucket 1 stuff, and then they would be assigned their resource ID. So you would actually need to do that split before you get the resource ID.
Okay, and so that's incumbent on the developer, whoever's filling this out, and usually that's generating units, right? That's like usually okay. And so they split that apart, and then by the time it gets to this point, that's its own separate entity, and it's got its own ID from your end, and it will eventually get a resource ID down the line.
Correct, yeah. And then this is the process that will assign it that resource ID. We'll assign the different resources, their different resource IDs. I guess any more questions on bucket 1 and 2 before we move on? Okay. So buckets 2 and 3, there's 2 parts of bucket 3. Bucket 3 also has some metering documentation, but we're going to talk about that in a later section. I want to talk about buckets 2 to 3 and how they are preparing your resource for the market. So we've done RIMS creation, we've done our bucket 1 model build submission, we've been assigned our model build. The model build's in the process of deploying, and we're finishing up bucket 2 and working on bucket 3. So if you can see here, I have two processes in here. We're going to talk about these 2. So again, reminder that all of this will be available. There is a lot of information on these slides, just here for reference to help you when you're actually working through the process. You can look at it later. So with bucket 3, 2 processes to prep you for entering the market. First one is market registration. So you might be more familiar with the calling it regulatory contracts and SC Association. Whoo, that's a horrible line. Erase that. But regulatory contracts and SC Association. The purpose of this process is to so the model build assignment models your project in our systems, and this models it to prepare it for the market. So to be able to operate in the market or participate in the market. So this is where your scheduling coordinator is going to be set up so that you can submit bids and actually participate in that market side. So there's a couple of parts to this, and it can get a little bit confusing because there's multiple documents being reviewed by different people, and it can we see some delays sometimes during this process. So over here, these are the documents that you need to submit. We've got our information request sheets for our regulatory contracts, our GRDT and GRDT explanation. Get my laser pointer back. And our SC letters. You have to kind of do these in tandem and also kind of in order. So once you get your resource ID, you can start working on all of these documents. First is your information request sheets for your regulatory contracts. You determine what kind of regulatory contracts you need for your project, depending on your project type and your metering type. And then you submit that to regulatory contracts. Before you submit it to regulatory contracts, you want to make sure that your GRDT has been submitted and accepted by CAISO through the RIMS bucket process. So your GRDT will be checked. Your regulatory contracts information request sheets will be checked against that GRDT. So it's important to work with your scheduling coordinator, have them review your GRDT and your GRDT explanations. They are in control of that document once your resource is in the market. They're very familiar with it. They can help you answer questions. And then once that is submitted and accepted, your regulatory contracts will be sent out for execution. Also, just make sure if you do not have it accepted yet, then regulatory contracts will not send out your your contracts for execution. After the GRDT and the SC letters are accepted, after the GRDT and the information request sheets are accepted, then then you can submit your SC letters. Typically, this should be closer to your sync date. And this is where your SC effective date, you'll hear effective date come up a lot. This is where that comes into play. So I think in our NRI guide, it says that your, and in the NRI checklist, it says that your bucket 3 documents have to be accepted 30 days before sync. I bring that up because this shows that you actually want to have some of that started and accepted earlier, because you need to have your GRDT and your regulatory contracts accepted and executed before you can do your SC letters. And your SC letters do have that 15 business day review period, just like all of our other bucket deliverables. And so does the GRDT. So you want to make sure that when you're planning out your project schedule, you're planning out how long bucket 3 is going to take you, you take into account these submittal timelines and review timelines. Back to the SC effective date. Your SC effective date must be 7 days before sync. That allows the scheduling coordinator to perform the necessary notifications that they need to. And then the effective date also has to be 11 business days after submittal. So I recommend to submit them early. That way you can have more flexibility with that date, because it comes up often where projects will submit their SC letters with an effective date exactly 11 business days out, and then they get rejected because the regulatory contracts weren't fully executed or because the GRDT wasn't ready. And then they have to go get new letters signed, change the date, possibly push back their sync. So there's a lot of submission tips and tricks and helpful reminders on this list that you can look at later. Okay. The next part of bucket 3, our market preparation. Is the LGIA, I call it the LGIA and configuration compliance verification. So what this simply means is we're checking to make sure that the equipment that you're installing and the settings that you're setting things like your relays up, your relays and your inverters up with are in compliance with the LGIA, as well as NERC and FERC standards and the CAISO tariff requirements. Again, a lot of different good information on here. We're not going to dive in deep into all of this, but just there for your reference later on. The way that we check the equipment and configuration compliance with the LGIA is you submit your control and protection inverter and control and protection inverter report. On here is listed everything that needs to be submitted with that and some tips for submission. This is where the MMAs come into account. If there's MMAs in process, we will be checking against the MMAs because one of the documents in here is actually a part of the MMA. That's the control protection inverter or attachment to Appendix 1, generating facility data. So it's that you don't have any changes in process because that can delay the review of these documents. We're going to move on to bucket 4, but before I do, any questions on bucket 3, market preparation? Silas, read it.
In the chat, Kelsey Gromley asked, does NRI check with regulatory contracts to see if the MSA/PGA are in the process of being executed prior to rejecting SC letters?
Yeah, so we do check with that. Sometimes with depending when you say in process can mean a lot of things. And there can be a lot of kind of extenuating circumstances. In the case, yes, we do check with regulatory contracts. If the timeline requirement, we don't think it will be met. So for instance, if the PGA is in process and we have it out for signature, but we haven't gotten it back yet, and we're nearing that either like that 11-day timeline or sooner, they may be denied. And the reason for that is rather than wait until 4 or 5 more days and deny them, we might make the judgment call to just deny them early so that you're aware that they need to be resubmitted because we wouldn't have enough time to process the documents. So it's something we do check, and normally we'll work with regulatory contracts to find out if where is the PGA at. And sometimes if it's not where regulatory contract says it's done, we're just waiting on execution of the PGA on our side, then we'll process, we'll roll through with processing those letters. So it is something that it can be difficult to coordinate. And that's where, again, we're saying, if you don't want to run into these issues, if you can submit your regulatory contracts early and get them submitted and completed earlier, it avoids those kind of hassles. We're really trying to avoid the just-in-time document submittals. I think if that's one of the things we really want to focus on is that just-in-time is probably going to be just too late. And that's just the way it is with the number of documents we have that are coming through and the timelines to review. So I hope that answers your question. It can be a fluid thing. Sometimes if there's coordination, maybe we can make it work, but I wouldn't count on I wouldn't count on just-in-time submissions working out.
I think there was another question in the chat. Silas, can you read that for me?
Yep, Sing Tay asks, is there a check against Appendix H requirements in the LGIA?
So if I am remembering correctly, Appendix H of the LGIA is in relation to inverter requirements. And yes, that is part of our LGIA verification with these 3 documents here. Well, mainly with these 2, control and protection inverter and inverter report.
Okay, we do have a question in the queue for raised hand. We'll go for that first. Justin Stevenson, please be sure to introduce your affiliation, and also for those in the chat, please submit those as well. Go ahead, Silas, unmute them.
Yeah, Justin Stevenson with Trimark. On a previous slide, you mentioned that the GRDT should be submitted and accepted before starting the regulatory contracts. Am I understanding that correctly?
They should be submitted and accepted before execution, before regulatory contracts will send out the contracts for execution. So you can you can start them at the same time. You can submit your info request sheets ahead of time. They're just ahead of time of having your GRDT accepted. They're just going to sit there until you tell regulatory contracts that, or until your GRDT is accepted.
Okay. Are there any plans to maybe update the guideline to kind of hint at that? Because right now it's really driving you to start the process and submit your documents in bucket 2. And I don't know if it's going to be clear to anybody that those are going to be sitting there waiting for final execution until the GRDT submitted. It's not really stated in the guidelines, I guess, is where I'm going. So with that.
So we are going to talk about some future documentation updates later on in our presentation. I do want to kind of explain like the reasoning for that. So after your model build assignment process while we're working on deploying the model build, that's when you're assigned your resource ID, all of your device IDs, and your rig points list. And that usually occurs around bucket 2. That is why we say to start it in bucket 2. That way you're ahead of the game. As soon as you receive your resource ID, you want to start both of those documents. But I'll let Andrew. Okay. So I hope that helps.
Yeah. Thanks.
And we have Sorry?
Go ahead, Silas. Go ahead, Silas.
Okay, we've got another question in the chat from Tyler Henderson. Tyler asks, several of our projects may be using a portion of the capacity in our queue position, and we build out the full capacity in phases. How does this impact NRI process and approvals when we do not have all of the design information for the later phases of the process?
That's a very good question. I'm going to hand it off to Andrew.
Yeah. So I think, first of all, I'll say that's not uncommon. Generally, what we look at is based on the resource ID. So the information you would put in the NRI project would be specific to that resource ID. So a lot of times we might have like a bus bar and it has future feeders that are on there for an eventual build out that's going to come later on. And those are generally just grayed out. I think that there's some in the single line drawing and 3-line drawing checklist, it lists on the graying out areas that are not part of this resource ID submission. So that's generally how you would handle that. The information that you're submitting should be for that resource ID. And so that goes down to if you're using inverters or depending on what type of project it is, if it's solar panels, you might have feeders. If it's a wind project, the turbines that are going to that specific resource ID. So it should be specific to that resource. And again, if it's some other type of generation, you can always send in a question to NRI and we can talk about it in more detail as far as how you would go about submitting those documents.
And just to state his affiliation, Tyler was from EDP Renewables. And that looks like it's all the questions in the chat and the verbal queue at this time.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move on to the next part. So we have completed, walking through this like it was a resource we're putting online. We've completed everything up to bucket 2 is complete. We've completed our market registration activities and our market preparation activities. And we're still in the process of completing bucket 3. That stuff's kind of going along in tandem with this next part, which is test energy preparation. So that is between buckets 3 and 4. It covers like the tail end of bucket 3 through bucket 4, which ends in your sink. So first part is our pre-sync meter and telemetry verification. So this is where I've included the metering documentation, meter and telemetry documentation. So some of this is submitted in bucket 1, some of this is submitted in bucket 3. I have those all kind of highlighted. Some of them aren't even submitted as a part of a bucket. So all that information is there for your reference in the future. And all of those documents, all of them in this bucket, have to be accepted so that we can request our point-to-point testing. So through all the processes that we talked about before, you got assigned your meter IDs, CAISO has modeled your IP address and your ECN connection, and now we are moving into model build deployment and getting our devices ready to test. So a couple of key things in here. First is you need to have your meter and rig equipment installed. That also includes your source devices. So when you are doing a rig and you are testing you're testing your points list that CAISO sends out, your source devices also should be installed and pre-tested. A lot of the times we get people coming in to do their point-to-point, and there's a lot of mistakes and things that weren't prepped, or even it comes up, they're like, oh, we didn't know that we needed that, and we don't even have that installed yet. So make sure that you are checking the guidelines and rules. EDAS is going to talk a lot more about that later in detail, but I just wanted to throw that out there. So your source devices and your rig and your meter are installed. Your ECN should also be installed and up and running. And then you send a pre-testing notification to CAISO. So you should be pre-testing all of your equipment, sending a notification to EDAS, and EDAS will perform a communications check to verify that your equipment is there and talking and that we can see it. And then you can get an appointment from EDAS. Again, more detail on that will be discussed later, like the request process and all of that. But one thing I do want to make clear in here is that you want your model build deployment date. If you think back to that schedule that we showed earlier, you want your model build deployment date to come before your point-to-point test appointment. Make sure you're factoring that in, because before that model build deployment, we can't see your equipment. In parallel, while you are doing all of this physical work on the meter and rig for the NRI process, you'll also be doing stuff in tandem for your PTO sync approval requirements. So this is when you'll be, wrapping construction up, wrapping up cold commissioning, doing all of your checklists for your PTO. And this is also where you'll be doing things like your in-service and your backfeed. And that leads you into your bucket 4 PTO sync approval. Once all of this is complete, then it leads into that sync approval process, which we're going to talk about in the next slide. Oh, not this slide. We're not going to go through these. These are some helpful do's and do nots before scheduling point to point. Just kind of recapping some of the stuff that I discussed in the last slide, as well as some other extra helpful tips and reminders, like for best projects. If you have a best idle flag, make sure that you pre-test it. So just some helpful things there for future reference. Okay, so we've completed buckets 1 through 4. We've completed all of our PTO sync requirements, and we have completed our point-to-point testing. Now this button in RIMS is going to turn green. This is our sync request. Before we get too deep into talking about the sync request, I do want to point out that there are some confusions around terminology. I think different companies end up using different things. So for KAISO, when we say initial synchronization, that is not the same as your in-service date. Your in-service date is your PTO. You can think of that like your backfeed date. That's when your PTO gives you permission to energize with them. Initial synchronization is when KAISO gives you approval to start test energy and trial operations. So make sure that you understand that in your head. Your backfeed is not tied to the NRI process. Usually you need to have your backfeed in place in order to get your PTO sync approval. Once you request sync, it's going to send it to the business units. Which business units you have will depend on that have to review your resource for sync. Will depend on the size, whether or not you have an LGIA, things like that. Again, a lot of information, and we're not going to go over everything on this slide, but what this slide shows you is all of the business units that have to review everything in your project that you've submitted so far. This is like a double checkpoint to make sure that before you start producing test energy, you have completed all the requirements. We're double checking you don't have an MMA, verifying that everything that has been submitted is accurate, and this process takes 10 calendar days from the time that you press that green button. And then, if you want to look at this in the future to see like what we are actually like looking for, what each group is looking for, all of that is in here for you to look at later. I'm going to zoom in here a little bit and move over so that you can see this. After all of the business units have approved your sync, then you're going to get an email saying that your sync has been approved. And in that email, we'll have your test energy schedule. So at that point, you have to work with your scheduling coordinator to do the test energy process that is in operating procedures 5320 and 5320A. There's some links to that on this page. We're going to talk about that later during the grid ops presentation. So we're not going to get into too much detail about what that process looks like right now. But the entire time that your project is in sync status and doing trial operations, you have to do that test energy schedule and that test energy schedule process. We're about to move on to COD, but I think that there's some questions. So any questions in the chat or queue?
The first question in chat comes from Alexander Kilmer from San Diego Gas and Electric. Alexander asks, is there a way to schedule the field work P2P date when the project is submitted? When I get the resource ID, which is the prerequisite for scheduling, I found the earliest date for an RIG P2P is really far away.
Yeah, Idas, would you like to touch on that?
Yes, hi, this is Priyanka Namburi from California ISO. We do require pre-testing and the communication check to schedule the point-to-point test because we want to prioritize the projects that are ready for the point-to-point test. And if you are unable to find a point-to-point test date on the fieldwork calendar, do reach out to us. We do provide appointments for the new resources that are closer to the sync date and have completed their pre-testing and communication check.
Thank you. Thank you, Priyanka. Yeah, one more thing on that. It's in my do's and don'ts, but you don't want to request a point-to-point too early. If you request your point-to-point too early, your project may not be ready at that time, and then you will have to cancel it, or you will have to do a partial test, and a partial test doesn't count. So that's not going to help your project schedule, and all it's going to do is clog up the calendar. Next question.
The next question is from Kelsey Gormley. She asks, when is it appropriate to follow up with NRI if we have reached the 10 business days for sync approval and we are still pending approvals for some business units?
I'm assuming that's in reference to the sync request. Yeah, at the 10 days, you can also reach out a couple days beforehand, and we'll check on those business units and try to push it through. As much as we try to stick to those 10 calendar days, the 10 calendar day process, there are always different considerations going on. So if you look all these business units, each one of these, there's usually a good reason if there is a delay. Either that was identified that there was an LGIA compliance issue or a modeling issue or something like that that could be holding it up. But please do reach out to us even a couple days before that 10-day timeline has run out. That way we can chase it down and get you answers on what's going on. Reach out to NRI. Yes, please reach out to NRI, not the individual business units. That will get you answers quicker than reaching out to the individual business units. And it's 10 calendar days for the sync request. Sorry,
Just to
guys,
state Kelsey's affiliation is Grid SME. The next question in the chat is from Tara Davis from AEPCO. Tara asks, is it possible to add estimated or average time ranges expectations that are typical to complete each bucket?
So our NRI checklist actually has that as far as the timelines of when. It doesn't have the timelines of how long it takes to complete each bucket because that really does depend. That can vary for a lot of different factors. That's why earlier we said it's like a 6 to 9 months average timeline. But if you do go into our NRI checklist, we do have the timelines and dates of when you need to have each bucket completed. So like, for example, bucket 3 needs to be, should be complete 30 calendar days before your sync date.
Okay. And then
sorry, one more thing on that. We'll discuss internally. Like we are working through document updates right now. We'll see if it's feasible, or we'll talk about that on the side and see if there's any way we can add that to the guide.
all right, and then Carmelina Spina asked for the PowerPoint presentation. Brenda Corona pasted the link to the PowerPoint in the chat, and that is all the questions we have in chat at this time.
All right, we're in the home stretch. We are gonna move on to our COD request. So this is we're in trial operations. We've gotten approval to sync. We are testing our energy and following that 3320 and 3320A test energy process. And now we are closing it out, working our way towards commercial operations. First part in here is our final equipment documentation verification. That's what I like to call it. This is your bucket 5. Mainly, this is your bucket 5. If you notice, bucket 5 is mainly composed of items that specifically address your equipment and your testing of that equipment. So like your meter site verification sheet, your certified relay test reports, which is the final control and protection report, and items like that that verify your testing and that you're getting ready for COD. Verifying that what you've submitted throughout the rest of the buckets is what is installed and tested. One thing just to point out here, I believe in the guide it says that you have to have your bucket 5 accepted 5 business days before COD. I would recommend as soon as you are able to, after you do your sync request and after your meter technicians have been able to verify all your phasers and everything, that you get your bucket 5 items submitted as soon as possible, even if your COD is pretty far off, just because these can take a while to review. All of them, not just the metering documents, but also the test reports for the relays. So make sure that you submit them as early as you can. And that way, if there are any mistakes, you'll have some time to get them fixed and reviewed, just like everything else, 10 to 15 business day review. And it will restart if you have to fix anything. Also, the MSVS needs signatures, so make sure that you know who is on your list, on your MSVS, that is supposed to sign those documents, and make sure you let them know, hey, you're gonna have to sign these. Make sure you sign them as soon as you get their DocuSign. A lot of the time, some people don't see it, and then it gets stuck there. And we are on to commercial operations. Just like the sync process, it's very similar, pretty much the exact same thing as sync. Well, not the exact same thing, but very similar, where once you have gotten bucket 5 approved, then your COD and COM buttons are going to turn green. We're going to take a second to talk about the difference between COD and COM. Commercial operations for markets is a process that we developed to allow resources to participate in the market commercially while they're still doing trial operations on some of the megawatts. So it's you're allowed to participate in the market with a portion of the megawatts and then test while you're testing the rest and finishing up all of your preparation for COD for the rest of those megawatts. This is something that should be used for projects that have a block implementation plan, which is where you have one resource ID and you are going to be doing multiple or even just like one. You're going to be trying to do little chunks of your megawatt capacity for that one resource ID. The other option is, or the other final thing is commercial operations. I have full commercial operations on there. It's a little, maybe not the best way to phrase it, but it's commercial operations. COD stands for Commercial Operations Declaration. This is when you have completed all of your LGIA requirements and your project is ready to, all of your megawatt capacity is ready to fully operate in the market. So there's no PTO remaining requirements like your like conditional limitations such as network upgrades. I know that a lot of us have had to deal with those recently. So COD means no limitations. You are ready to operate in the market. Also, please note that when you are ready to request COM or COD, your project should be ready to operate in the market if you got approval the next day. I think a lot of the times we see projects that do their COD request, they're still finishing things up, and that is going to cause delays in this review process, which we'll talk about in a second. One other thing is that the COM process, the COM process, and the COD process are slightly different, but very similar. And I just have some of the differences laid out here, mainly that you have to submit a COM plan and multiple COD requests, or COM and then a COD request. And lastly, the review. You have more reviews in this one. We have some of the same reviews like EDAS, COC, or sorry, EDAS, operational readiness, MCI, but there's a lot more reviews for this because we are, to remind us of what the goal of the NRI process is, it's to operate, make sure that projects that are entering the market can operate reliably. So that's why there's more checks involved. We're double checking everything. And even as a part of this, you may see some documents needing to be resubmitted. Maybe they were accepted, but due to like understanding how the process works or seeing how test energy is going, like there might need to be updates. So I believe in our guide, it says 5 business day review process for this. But we are in the process of updating our guide to say 10 business days. And that is just due to the impacts that we've discussed earlier, the complexity of projects, the amount of projects that are trying to COD, all of those factors make it very difficult for us to do the 5 business day timeline that used to be possible. So make sure you guys are planning for that, account for that in your schedules. And then the other thing, even though we say 10 business days, you should probably try to be ready a little bit earlier than that 10 business days. One issue that we have a lot is the 72-hour test data, which is 72 consecutive hours of good data. And we're seeing a lot of projects run into problems at that stage, which EDAS will go into in more detail later on. So just run through, you have to do your 72-hour test. You may have to resubmit some stuff, but then once everything is accepted and everything is double reviewed, each business unit has given their approval. The directors give their approval, and you'll receive a COD approval email. This email signifies that you've been approved, but you still have to declare COD. And you do that by submitting a COD declaration letter to RIMS, in which case you'll get another email notification stating that you've declared COD. And that is the end of the process. So before we move on to finishing up here, I'll open it up for questions again.
First question in the chat comes from Eddie Dale from CPUC. Eddie asks, how do developers keep track of where they are in the NRI process? Is there any kind of interface that shows their status in the process and the status of the various dependencies that need to be satisfied before they get to the next step?
Yeah, so there are actually 2 ways that you can keep track of your project's process. The first way is for RIMS access. I would recommend that to whoever is actually running the process, whoever's going to be submitting documents and interacting with CAISO and NRI. And then the second way is to be on the FNM reports. These are a daily report that goes out. There's an email list in RIMS. It's also in the project details form. You can list out anybody who needs project updates, and you will get, anytime there is a change or an update at 10 a.m. the next morning, it will send out an email. And that email has everything, pretty much everything that's in RIMS, all of the updates, comments on submittals, what's accepted, when it was accepted, what's not accepted, all of that.
The next question is from Kelsey Gormley with Grid SME. Kelsey asks, when is the COC issued? prior to COD or after COD? Often we see that the COC approval is given in RIMS for COD approvals, but the actual certificate is not issued until some time after COD approval.
I'll pass it over to Idas.
Hi, this is Priyanka Namburi again. So COC and COD, both processes go in parallel. After the COD is requested, the EDAS group works on the COD or the 72-hour test, and also the COC approval where we do the meter data validation. So depending on which one goes faster, if there are no meter issues, we have the signatures on the MSVS forms, and the meter data looks good, then we'll complete the COC. Or if the 72-hour data is good, so we'll get one of those approvals. But if there are any issues, sometimes the issues could be related. If it is a meter-related issue, then both of them will be halted, and communication will be sent out through RIMS that there is this reason, there is an issue with the meter or an issue with the telemetry data, which we think that the meters may also need to be reprogrammed, and then we may need updated MSVS forms and such. So depending on what the issue is, one of them may be approved before the other, or both of them will be delayed. Or if there are no issues, in the ideal case, we approve both of them.
Thank you.
And that is all the
Any
questions
other
we have in chat at this time.
Okay, thank you. All right. So just wrapping up this process, we just went through the whole process. It's a lot of information, and there's a lot of things to look into and remember, which is why we are making these slides available for you. And if you have any questions on them, please feel free to reach out to New Resource Implementation at kaiso.com. And the last thing we're going to talk about is after COD. This is resource adequacy. I know this is a big item for a lot of projects, especially our battery resources. As Andrew mentioned earlier, this is not a part of the NRI process. This happens after COD. NRI process ends at COD. I guess this could happen after COM as well, in which case you would still be finishing up your NRI process, but mostly you'll be completed with NRI at the time that you're doing resource adequacy. So you have to achieve COD, and then you have to submit your NQC and your EFC, which are two deliverables needed for the RA application. Then KAISO has to review it. Usually takes, you should allocate at least 2 weeks for them to review it. I've linked a couple of pages where you can get more information on those, this process and how it works. I know it is a little bit of a confusing process, but just know you have to get COD in order to submit any of those documents to apply for RA. There will be a period of time between COD and RA where you won't be showing in the resource adequacy schedule. So take that into account when you are planning out your PPAs or your LGAA schedules, your COD. Make sure you're taking these dates into account. Last couple of slides here is some tips for success and some RIMS reminders. Things like make sure that your RIMS information is up to date as possible. Sometimes people won't update their contacts, and then F&M updates and contact is being sent out, and it's all getting kicked back. So make sure that you are keeping RIMS up to date. Make sure that you are checking the website, attending stakeholder meetings like you are today, and signing up. You can also sign up for notifications on our website. All sorts of information, tips that will help you complete this process. And there's also some helpful links on this page. We don't need to go through all of those. So I'm going to let Andrew take us out of here and wrap it up.
Okay, we are in the home stretch here. So the last thing we just want to kind of talk about are some of the enhancements that we're working on. And a lot of these enhancements are targeted at trying to make it the whole process easier, easier to follow, and more clear. As you can see, it's a long process, it's a detailed process, and it's just that is the way it is in order for us to maintain that reliability that we need for the market. So the future enhancements that are coming up. So some of the things that we're working on that we're spending a lot of time on right now are the KAISO website is going to be updated and refreshed. That is rolling out at the end of May. What we've done there is we've tried to put more information on the NRI page exactly where you need it. So links to documents are on that NRI page, so you don't have to go to another blank page. It will take you straight to the document that you need. That's one of the updates we made. We also tried to clarify for the most common type of projects, which are generally these new resource implementation projects. So that is all listed first. We're also going through the documentation that we have to try to make it clear. I think with the process, we have a lot of new people, new companies that are coming into the KAISO, and we're realizing that the information that we currently have out there is not super clear. The other item that we're noticing is that some of the timelines that we put in there, they're just not timelines that we can maintain any longer. And then sometimes there were expectations that people had because we'd been able to accommodate it in the past. We want to clarify what the actual process requirements are, what the timelines are, and not have it be kind of a, well, I learned over time how to do this, and this is what they want. We want to make sure it's stated clearly what we're looking for. Another item that's happening is the SCME and the DARA projects will be moving into RIMS. That is targeted for later this fall. And so those processes, when you're looking to start an SCME project or a DARA project, you'll be doing that in the RIMS software. Currently, that's handled through email correspondence through the NRI inbox. But we'll send out a market notice, and there will also be training along with that change when it occurs. And then another thing that we're rolling out that we're kind of excited about is an NRI post-COD survey. And the point of this survey is to get direct feedback from people who have experienced the NRI process. What went well? What did not go well? And what do we need to clarify? What do we need to improve on? That's feedback that we're looking to get so we can try to figure out we have an idea of what doesn't work just based on the number of submissions we get and questions we have, but we also want to get feedback directly from our stakeholders on what do we need to spend the most of our time trying to improve. So that NRI post-COD survey will be rolling out shortly, and it will go out to projects once you've completed COD. You will then get that survey to fill out, and the survey is designed for people in different roles within the project, because the project manager might have had a vastly different experience than like the meter technician had, or what a consultant had. It's trying to get those different perspectives so we can try to clarify our documentation for multiple roles. And for that NRI post-COD survey, that will go out to the same people who are listed in the project. So it might be an issue where if you have people that aren't getting the daily project updates in RIMS, but you still want to have them provide feedback, you'd need to forward that survey to them. And the survey is not like password protected or anything. It's just going to ask some basic questions about the project. It's not particular to the project, so don't feel bad about forwarding it to other people that were working on the project. All right, so in summary, everything that we covered today, we went through the goals of the NRI process, what we're trying to do. We're trying to efficiently get these resources into the market. Again, that's our goal, is to move resources into the market as efficiently and quickly as we can, while maintaining that accuracy and reliability that we need to maintain. So the current factors that are impacting the success of these goals. So kind of going through the increase in number of projects, the complexity of the projects that's causing a lot of work on our end, which is impacting our ability to reach those efficient timelines that we had previously looked for. The other thing that we're looking to is we have our standards. We can't be flexible on those standards. And so that's where we have NERC, FERC, tariff, and BPM. We can't we can't ignore those. So that's where we're trying to figure out other ways we can increase our efficiencies. And then the future enhancements, how we're looking to try to increase this efficiency for the process, also make it easier for everybody involved so that we can reach the goals that we have. So if you have any questions on the presentation for NRI here, you can either email us directly, or you can also fill out a city ticket, and you'll want to put NRI in the subject so that it goes to us. There's not an actual drop down for NRI. And then also I wanted to bring up with the RA, if you have questions on RA, those should also be submitted via city, not to the NRI inbox. Again, it's outside of the NRI process. So if you do have any questions on the RA process, submit those via the city ticket. All right. Any last questions?
There are not any questions at this time.
Did you want to read that one? Okay. All right, Silas, you can go ahead and read that question. You could paraphrase it a little bit to the
Yeah.
question.
Alexander Kilmer, San Diego Gas and Electric asks, thanks to EDAS and NRI for all the help they've provided me in the past year. Is there a description of what the 72-hour test requirements are? I'm sorry, this has been a sticking point for our projects, by the way. Second thing is there an option for our two-way communications and RIMs? I've found it tough to understand and overcome issues through sending info via email and juggling responses via RIMs and email.
Okay. Yeah, so our EDAS group will be going over the 72-hour requirements in the next presentation. So I'll wait for them to answer it during that time. And then for the other item with the two-way communication through RIMs, there currently isn't a way for there to be two-way communication. So the best item I can tell you is to submit an email, include the project number, you can include the project name, and then to include what the question is. I think a lot of times we get where people will just respond back with the full network model summary that was sent out, the FNM report summary that was sent out, and they don't update the like what the subject line is of the email, and sometimes the subject will change over the course of the conversation, and it becomes difficult to track in that way. So sending an email with the clear project number, description of what the subject line describing what the question is, I think that's the best way. If we're still having issues, we can take that as something that maybe we need to find an alternative form of communication if the email is getting too bogged down or complicated. Yeah, so that's kind of a good question. Currently, the emphasis has been on trying to staff up in other areas. So for our instance, our EDAS group has added a few more people, and same with like in other areas. I'm sure you can relate to this. It's very easy to post a job. It's much harder to get somebody that can come in and fill that position. And so that's one of the items that we're kind of looking at right now is, can we fill the areas where we're seeing the biggest, I want to say like number of documents that have to reviewed? EDAS reviews a tremendous number of documents for the NRI process. They also have a number of other job duties within the ISO that they have to fulfill. And so trying to get them staffed up helps NRI. And so initially that has been our focus, is on staffing in other areas. It doesn't mean that later on we won't staff up people. I think it's something that obviously management's looking at, but I don't want to speak too much for them. But I think that has been our focus right now, is on finding the other areas that have the highest impact and where they're seeing the greatest number of just work hours that they have to complete.
I'll just add to that a little bit. Thanks for the question, Emily. So yes, definitely what Andrew said is accurate. And we did add one new member to our MPAI team to really focus on the process improvements as well. And she's heading that on. And we're definitely looking at the potential of, looking at more of like a project management type structure. So there's more availability to help guide through the process. Something we're looking at. Yep.
Looks like we have one more question that came in, Silas.
There is another question from Kelsey Gormley. She asks, do you have an estimated time frame for when the NRI guide will be updated?
Yeah, so we're going to be doing some small updates. I think currently we're looking at rolling out some changes with the review timelines. That will be the first thing we update. After that, we're going to be looking for feedback that we're getting on where we need to do some improvements. So we have some items that we'll be rolling out. I think like the calendar days is a big thing. I have a note to review the regulatory contracts portion, but we have been kind of doing incremental updates as items come up that we think need to be addressed in the NRI guide that previously weren't. The guide also is kind of a mix currently between, I want to say, like the NRI process, then there's like some WEIM information in there. And so we're trying to look of how can we streamline this so it doesn't seem so choppy as far as how items are sorted in there. Currently, there's some room for improvement, we think, in that as far as being a little more clear. Yeah, the other thing too, yeah, we'll be adding in areas for how the SCME and DARA will change as those items roll out.
There we go. Where do you want those, like if we see something that, could be improved, where do you want us to submit those? How do you want us to submit that? Like maybe just some feedback.
Yeah,
For
that's a
the
good
guide
question.
and all the documentation.
Yeah, that's a good question. So if you send them to the NRI inbox, depending on which area they're in, so the NRI or the MPAI, whatever area it might be that you see something that could be improved, if you send that to NRI and you can just put in like the in the subject line that it's like a process improvement, we actually have a folder where we're taking things that we found over time that we're like storing now in this folder so we can go through to do the updates. And that's where I'm saying, generally, as we see something that needs to be corrected or updated, we'll probably be adding those into the NRI documentation and then just republishing it on the website.
We do have a couple more questions in chat if you'd like to go to those.
Yeah.
Okay. Benny Zeminski from SRP New Resource EIM Implementation Lead. Will there be a different presentation for more of the WEIM process?
That is a great question. Yes, there will be. This was our first presentation that we were looking to do. We're looking to do one also for the WEIM process as well. I think that will happen later, end of May. I was going to say this summer, but yeah, end of May. We'll be doing one at, I'm trying to remember what it is, the WEIM Stakeholders meeting. I don't remember the name of the meeting.
No, it's the board. Oh, it's on the first. Yeah. Stakeholder affairs, yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So, yeah, we'll be doing it at that meeting.
But something helpful to note is that there are parts of this process and this presentation that will can relate to the SCME, the SCME, WEIM process because, like we've said, that's going to be moving into RIMS soon, which I think ties into the next question.
The next question is from Tanisha Hamilton from Tucson Electric Power. They ask, is there a way to see what we submit, i.e. SLD, meter config, etc., like a document repository of some type?
Yeah, that's a good question. So currently for the WEIM entities, when they complete the SCME process, that is done through an access database that we have set up through the NRI inbox. And so it's not something where you can see, where you would be able to download the documents once you've uploaded them. That is part of that enhancement when we move the SCME process into RIMS. You then would have access to it. And there will be, I want to be clear, there'll be separate training on that when those changes occur. There'll be a training for the KISO BA, WEIM, or the KISO BA SCME process. We'll also be doing a separate training for the WEIM SCME process. So there'll be two separate trainings for that we will announce later this fall when that gets closer to those changes rolling out. So once they're in RIMS, you would be able to have access. It is RIMS is like primary focus is on document storage and retention. So it would, yeah. The existing NRI projects, they are handled through RIMS, and so that's where there's kind of right now there's a disconnect between the two processes. So.
And if you can work with your project manager or NRI coordinator, whoever's the one who has access to RIMS, and your UAA, if you are trying to get access to that documentation, it's best not to have too many people poking around in RIMS. So make sure you work with your company on the best way to get that.
Next question.
There's no more questions in queue.
Okay.
Awesome. So thank you,
All right.
Andrew Brown and Chandra Wagner. Just for those that are online, they did ask for your names, so I want to quickly reiterate your guys' names. So right now we're going to take a quick little break. We'll be starting around 10:28, so be back here by 10:28, just so we can get folks a little bit ready for the next portion of our agenda item, which will be EDAS, and then we'll get the folks that are presenting up here to get ready for that topic. But Silas, just set that reminder in the chat for those who are WebEx. So all those on the WebEx, join us in a little bit. Take a quick break. We'll be right back.
Hi, and welcome back to the next part of our presentation today. I'm Priyanka Namburi. I'm Senior Advisor in Energy Data Acquisition Specialist Group. Brenda already went over the housekeeping, so I'm going to skip over this slide. So today in this part of the presentation, I'll talk about metering and telemetry documentation. NRI already covered this topic at a high level, so we'll be going into in detail on the various documentation. I'll also talk about the telemetry data validation, telemetry non-compliance and exemption process, REGIS, and towards the end of this presentation, I'll quickly walk you through the metering and telemetry webpage and show you where various documents related to the metering and telemetry are on our website. So who and what is EDAS? So EDAS, Energy Data Acquisition Systems, or Energy Data Acquisition Specialist team. So we are responsible for maintaining and setting up standards for metering and telemetry. So under revenue metering, we approve the ISO meters, which are used for settlement purposes. We are also responsible for certifying the ISO facilities and inspecting, working with the inspectors to get them inspected. And for the meter data processing, so we collect the meter data for the ISO metered entities. We process that meter data, and then we send that data to ISO settlements. And for the scheduling coordinator metered entities, we review and approve the settlement quality meter data plan, which NRI mentioned earlier that currently the SQMD plans are submitted through email process to NRI, which will be moving over to RIMS quickly. And we also certify and test the DNP3 devices for the telemetry data. I'll go over the required documents only related to metering and telemetry through the NRI bucket process. In the first bucket, in bucket 1, EDAS requires the drawings, the single and 3-line drawings. So in these drawings, we get the information that is required to set up the meters in our system, and also the telemetry data points, which is required for a resource to participate in the market. So it's very important to identify the devices in the drawings very clearly, like where the meter is located, which is the ISO meter, because there are more than one meter located at the field. So we would like to know which meter is the ISO meter, and also identify the transformers, the voltage levels, and the breakers. So it will help us in creating the telemetry points and speed up the process, or else, there will be a going back and forth of asking you the question of which is the ISO meter, or to label the breakers correctly. And these drawings also are required to be professionally engineer stamped. And we have checklists for our documentation on our website. I'm going to show those checklists later when I walk you through the web page. But we highly recommend you to review the checklist prior to submitting your documents to RIMS, which will be very helpful and streamline the entire process for both ISO and the generator owners. Another document that's required is the communication block diagram. So this gives us information about the communication methodology, how various devices in the field are talking to each other, and how the rig or meter will be communicating to ISO. So please do submit them in the PDF formats, and we also have a checklist published for the communications block diagram on our website. Another document that's required in bucket 1 is the rig details form. This document tells us information about what is the IP address that we will be using to connect to the rig, and whether that rig is a standalone or whether it is shared by other resources. So again, this information is very crucial because it goes into the full network model. So an incorrect IP address may delay the process, or if you incorrectly enter information that it is standalone, whereas your plan is to aggregate it with an existing rig. So that also defines how we create the points and the DNP bit byte numbers. So please ensure the information is correct before you submit these documents, especially the bucket 1 documents, because they are tied to the full network model. Bucket 2 and 3. Similar to the rig details form, the meter configuration worksheet gives us information to set up the meter in our MV90 system. The IP address, again, it's crucial, but bucket 2, you'll have time to edit the information, whereas bucket 1, because it's tied to FNM, it may delay the process if any information is incorrect. Meter configuration worksheet also has information related to the meter, what type of ISO meter you're using, how the meter will be programmed. So at this stage, maybe it's initial stages, it's your plan on how the meter is programmed, but if there are any changes to the meter programming than the original plan, please submit the updated meter configuration worksheet with accurate information as soon as possible. Any incorrect information on the meter configuration worksheet will delay the point-to-point test and may result in missing that appointment, and you would have to wait for the follow-up appointment to open up. Bucket 3 has 24-hour contact information. So this information is the contact information related to the site. So after the COD, whenever there is any issue with the rig, we will be using the contact information provided on the sheet. The site contact and other personal site manager contacts to notify them what problems we are having with the devices. And the CPS agreement is for the rig certificate, and ECN agreement is for the communication if you are using the ECN network to connect to ISO. So all these 3 should be complete for you to schedule a point-to-point test. So after the point-to-point test, for the bucket 5, we require a MSVS, meter and site verification sheet. This document has a lot of information, which is really crucial for the site to receive a COC, Certificate of Compliance. So the information on this is required for us to complete the meter data validation. And multiple parties may have to enter the information. So a lot of coordination is also needed so that the accurate information is given to ISO on the MSVS sheet. And this, like NRI mentioned before, this document requires signatures from multiple parties. So it is important to have the right email address. And please notify the site owner or the installer, programmer, and inspector that the MSVS has been uploaded to RIMS, and pretty soon they will receive a DocuSign notification for the document to be signed. So POR calculation, it's the loss calculation sheet. It only applies if that particular resource has losses programmed in the meter. So only in that case, a POR sheet is required. If there is 1 meter per resource and it is located at the high side where we are receiving the net energy, then in those cases, the POR is not required. Similar to POR, meter exemption and metering scheme overview are not applicable for all resources. It's only when the scheme or the meter is programmed not according to a standard way. So if there is any exemption from the tariff requirements, such as raw and unedited data, so if the meters are talking to other meters for loss calculation, that is a reason for requesting a meter exemption. So in those cases, we would require an exemption and metering scheme overview. So you may know ahead of time what is the plan to program the meters, whether it requires a loss compensation scheme. So you can open up that dialogue with EDAS so we know that what's happening. And in the single line, when we see multiple meters, loss compensator meters, we get that information too. So ahead of time, you can request for the meter exemption and metering scheme overview and give us as much information as possible prior to the point-to-point test on how these meter schemes are set up. So once we receive all these documents, the next steps for ISO pole meters are ISO ME, meter entities. We issue the certificate of compliance. As I mentioned earlier, the COC and COD are 2 independent processes, and we start them parallelly once the COD is requested. And depending on whether there's any issues or not, if there are only telemetry issues, for example, related to a med station, that will not stop you from getting a certificate of compliance. If it is only a meter-related issue that's impacting both the 72-hour test and the COC, that may delay both of them. And this is issued after the bucket 5 is completely done. So we need the test data to be recorded on the meter for us to validate it. So once we validate that, we issue the certificate of compliance. Then for the telemetry, we also do the telemetry data validation. That is called the 72 hours check. So we check every single data point, all the analog data points, all the digital data points, and all the logical calculations for a 72-hour period. And we expect that the data is in good quality and getting as expected data in the calculations and the logic working accurately. So once that meets, we give the 72-hour approval. So I'll talk about that in detail in the next slides. Okay, regarding the documentation, some of the common problems that we are seeing is the address mismatch. So on multiple documents, we require the address. So please ensure that the address is accurate on all the documents. And on the single line and 3-line drawing, we need the project numbers. So please ensure that the project numbers are accurate, especially if there are multiple projects that are right next to each other. When you submit the SLDs, we're graying out the other projects or future projects. Please ensure that the project numbers are accurate. And on the MSVS forms, we do see incorrect seal numbers. This happens when MSVS form from a previous project is used and then you update the information. Sometimes some of the information is left out and not being updated. So that's another problem. And MSVS, since it is required very close to the COC or COD timeline, it delays the entire process. So, or it delays the COC and COD approval. So please make sure that all the information on MSVS is accurate and we don't recommend you to use a previous form and copy the information, because most of the information is different from a meter to meter unless they belong to the same resource. Please make sure to update the meter seal numbers and identifying the meters on the drawings. So that's also required. And on the MSVS and the meter maintenance forms, the email address, because if that's correct, if that is incorrect, then our DocuSign will fail, then we have to notify you. Once again, it will delay the process. Another important information that we need on a meter configuration worksheet is load standby provider. So the load standby provider is the entity that provides you the retail load. So it's important to get this information correct on the meter configuration worksheet because it may impact your settlement statements. So if it is a consultant or a resource owner, if they are not sure of who your load standby provider is, please find out the correct information. Don't add ISO if you're not sure of that, because if you enter ISO as your load standby provider, then we may ask NRI to open a CLAB project so we can use your channel 1 load under a CLAB project. So it may cause additional confusion if an incorrect information is provided for a load standby provider. For the point-to-point test, as we mentioned before, we need pre-testing to be done and communication check. So if the pre-testing is not done completely or thoroughly, it will cause issues during the point-to-point test. And as many of you know, it's really hard to get an appointment on the EDAS fieldwork calendar. So we highly recommend you to make good use of the time allocated for your point-to-point test. So thorough pre-testing will definitely help during the point-to-point testing. And the meter configuration worksheets, like I said, if there is any change in the plan from what you planned to program your meters during the bucket 1, and by the time you do the point-to-point test, if the KEs have changed or the IP address has changed, please send the updated configuration worksheets. It takes time for us to update the new information during the point-to-point test and reread the meters, so it will delay the point-to-point test. And depending on number of meters that site has, if it has several meters, like sometimes we have 4 meters or 8 meters per site, we may not be able to make those updates on the fly. So we would have to reschedule the point-to-point testing. And we require testing from the source device, so be prepared for the point-to-point test to test the source devices. If for some reason it's not possible, do let us know ahead of time so we can discuss and talk about any other possible solutions. And frequency response points, I know we have recently started, since last 2 years, we have started adding the frequency response points. They are also required for the point-to-point test for us to check off the point-to-point test as complete. So the frequency response points also have to be programmed and pre-tested prior to the point-to-point test date. So I'll pause here and see if there are any questions before we talk about the 72-hour test. Pat.
Test. There we go. I have 2 questions for you, and I think they're probably easy, but thank you. So since you just mentioned it, source device testing, this is, I think, a bit of a shift, but could you just confirm that when we talk about source device testing, we're talking about injecting voltage and current into the relays and such that provide gross measurements for point-to-points and for the site?
For the gross measurements, it should come from the gross meter. And for the revenue meter from the UPMW and UPMV from the revenue meter. So it's the other devices that the rig talks to. So we want that directly from the source devices. So wherever those data points are originating from.
Right. So I guess, so maybe to rephrase it, traditionally we've just, a lot of the gross points come from a relay through a substation RTAC standard process, and then we would just force from the substation RTAC. Recently, on a couple projects, we've been asked to, for the first time, basically just inject at the relay. And I just want to confirm that that's kind of a new expectation or
Yes, yeah. It was a standard practice before, and over the years, we expected that is how it is being done. we recently saw more issues, more and more telemetry data issues. So we wanted to ensure that we are testing it from the relay devices.
Makes perfect sense. I just want to make sure I can help manage expectations appropriately. So
Sure.
perfect.
And like I said, if there is any resource where it is not doable or it's more complex, do open up a dialogue with us so we have that understanding of, or discuss with each other how it can be done.
Perfect. Thank you. Second question is a meter config sheet question. Specifically on more complex interconnections where we have multiple meters and a lot of times neutral meters, like a calculating meter, transformer line meter, they'll get attributed to a storage resource. The form has an instruction about how to indicate if CalISO is submitting load data for the resource. And so the question is just when those calculating meters and non-resource settlement meters are attributed to a resource, should we be selecting whether CalISO is serving that load on the basis of the function of that meter or on the basis of the resource?
On the basis of the resource.
Okay, so
Yeah.
even if it's a line meter that you won't be settling on, I still need to indicate that CalISO is serving for that config sheet.
Yes, if CalISO is serving for that, yes.
Well, I guess, but they wouldn't be because it's just a calc meter. There's no settlements. You see what I'm
Right,
saying?
but at the resource level, if CalISO is serving the load at the resource level, then on all the meter configuration worksheets, we want you to indicate CalISO. If PG&E or SCE is the load serving entity, then please include that on all the meter configuration worksheets.
Gotcha. Thank you. That was what I was looking for.
Sure, yeah. Are there any questions on the chat? Okay. Okay, moving on. Now let's talk about some of the common issues we see during a 72-hour test. If the resource is not generating and if we don't have enough operational data, then we cannot complete the 72-hour test, because as part of 72-hour test, we ensure that some of the logical calculations are also working well. So if we have to check if a Yukon is working well, we need to know whether the logic is working when the resource is generating and when the breaker is closed. And also the scaling and polarity. So to verify a lot of the telemetry information, we need some generation data during that period of 72 hours to complete the 72-hour test. Another issue we see commonly is the state of charge and max energy oscillations. So please verify that prior to requesting for the 72-hour or COD test, whether any of the data has any oscillation issues or spiking issues. And also frequency response points, we are seeing scaling issues. So please check that prior to the 72-hour test if there are any scaling issues for the frequency response points or in general any other telemetry points. And ensure that the mirrored values are programmed correctly and does not have any issues. And as I mentioned, the logic for the Yukon or AGC, all those logical points are programmed and working well prior to the 72-hour test request. So earlier there was a question about the 72-hour test requirements. Telemetry BPM has high-level requirements in it. We are also working with NRI team to include the 72-hour test requirements in the NRI guide. We will post that soon, but yeah, telemetry BPM do have at a high level what the 72-hour requirements are. So next, let's talk about the non-compliance. So telemetry BPM section 8.4 has information about the telemetry non-compliance process. So this is when after the resource goes through the COD process. And then when we see issues with the rig, when there's a loss of communication or few telemetry points in bad quality, then you'll get a phone call from our service desk that we don't have communication with the rig. You'll also receive emails about the loss of telemetry. We expect the resource owners to start working with the technicians or the communication partners on what the issue is. And depending on how big of an issue it is, whether it can be resolved sooner or takes longer, then request for a telemetry exemption to stay in compliance with ISO requirements. So the deadlines to request for an exemption or to resolve the telemetry issue is within 5 business days if the resource is greater than 45 megawatts, and 14 business days if the resource is less than 45 megawatts. And failure to resolve the issue or request for an exemption may result in rules of conduct penalty, as most of you are already familiar with it. So we definitely recommend you to resolve the issues as soon as possible. And if it requires additional days, do request for exemption. And all the critical points that are required for the telemetry compliance process is listed in the telemetry BPM. Telemetry exemptions. So after you request for a telemetry exemption and when the issue gets resolved, we need 72 hours of good quality data for the issue to clear out. Until then, we will not be able to communicate that issue is resolved. So we wait for 72 hours and then verify that the issue is resolved and we get good quality data. Then we communicate that the issue is now cleared. And for some of the telemetry exemptions, we require additional documentation, especially if you are requesting for renewal or extension of the timeline, because we and ISO operators need these telemetry issues to be resolved as soon as possible. If it is taking longer than the initial 1 month, then we need additional documentation and a clear resolution plan with the deadlines. So we may also request you to give us the purchase order number if you are waiting for any parts, or a service order number. And yeah, we said that point to request for a renewal, we do need additional information. And so while this resource is in the exemption period and you're working towards resolving it, the scheduling coordinator is required to call the ISO Gen Desk and update the output. So because we need to know how much the plant is generating. So please notify your scheduling coordinator. They're already aware of the procedures, but we just want to remind you again that the scheduling coordinators are required to update the plant output. Go ahead.
So just curious in terms of connectivity, with AT&T being unable to service all of the areas and with hearing that the Anira service is going to be sunset soon, are there plans for future communication options?
We are looking for more communication options. We don't have anything in the pipeline, but we had another option for a few years. AT&T ECN is the one that is most reliable and what most of our resource owners are preferring. And we also have a public internet option, which is unsecure. So not many resource owners would prefer to have their data on the public internet. So at present, those are the only 2 options. But yes, we are looking for more options. And last thing to add, the exemptions are not provided before the COD. So during the 72-hour test, if there are any known issues, they have to be resolved for the resource to obtain the COD, and exemptions will not be provided pre-COD or during the 72-hour period. I'll pause here and see if there are any questions before we move on to Regis. Okay. Regis, Western Renewable Energy Generation Information System. So Regis, it's an independent system where the renewable energy certificates are uploaded within the Western Interconnection Territory. And this Regis, it's a division of WEC. So this is primarily for the renewable resources. And a QRE, Qualified Reporting Entity, that's an entity that submits this renewable energy data on behalf of the generator owner to the Regis. And ISO is one of the QREs. And for ISO to be a QRE for your renewable resource, a QRE SA request application agreement must be signed. Once it is signed, ISO can perform your QRE services. Some FAQs that we commonly get regarding Regis is, can this QRE SA or the request form, can it be submitted before the COD? Yes, if you want us to include your test energy, if you want ISO to submit your test energy to Regis, then it needs to be executed or submitted before the sync. And if it is not done at that time and it was done after the COD, ISO will not be able to submit your test energy, and you would have to sign another QRA agreement with a different entity to submit your test energy to Regis. And where do you sign on the form? So the form only asks you for the details. Once you fill out that form, we'll review that information, and then we will route it through DocuSign. At that time, you will be signing the agreement. And are there any additional documentation required for QRESA? No additional documents are required for signing signing the QRE agreement. However, because ISO will be, if ISO is your QRE, then that meter have to be an ISO certified meter. So all the metering requirements for ISO meters will apply, such as you have to sign a MSA agreement, you have to provide us a MSVS document. So all the other ISO metering requirements must be adhered for ISO to be your QRE. And how long does it take for this documentation? Because we are working here in parallel with your project, COC and COD, and also the point-to-point test and other last final checks for the resource to obtain the commercial operation. And we are also working on your Regis application. So it may take from few business days to a couple of weeks for us to complete the QRE process. Let me walk you through the ISO metering and telemetry webpage. Silas, can you confirm that you can see the webpage?
Right now, I just see slide 16 rather than a web browser. Okay, now I see the web page. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So metering and telemetry webpage is located on the ISO website under participate. It's the third one on the right list. So once you click on that, it will take you to the metering and telemetry webpage. On the top of the webpage, we have our required documents, the ISO tariff and BPM for metering and direct telemetry. Then we have listed out some procedures on how to certify the metering facility and how to become a meter inspector, meter exemptions, and the meter data processing, and SQMD plan for the scheduling coordinator meter entities. Then we have information on meter installation, inspection, and certification, how to make your fieldwork appointments, list of ISO approved meters and inspectors, various forms, with the contact information for metering, metering configuration worksheet, MSVS forms. These are the documents that you'll be filling out. Always take the latest form from the website because we do keep making updates to these documents, and inspector application form, inspector agreement, and such. Then the guidelines, these are the checklists that I talked about earlier. So we have list of checklists and the fieldwork guide posted here. So please review these checklists prior to submitting the documents, and a fieldwork guide before making the appointment on EDAS fieldwork calendar. Then we have some documents related to the SQMD, settlement quality meter data. So SQMD template and additional devices form and a tutorial that will help you fill out the SQMD template. Then we have some exemption related information and form and previous exemptions that we have approved over the years. Then the bottom of this web page, we have information related to direct telemetry, some procedures on how to do the point-to-point testing, what is in a point-to-point testing and different requirements, and some deployment guides and procedures, and again, telemetry exemption request form and the exemptions we have given in the past. Other forms such as the 24-hour contact sheet and rig details. And then we have some information related to the rig certificate. And then some MRIS information. MRIS is the meter data submission website where you will be submitting the settlement quality meter data. So this part of the web page will provide you information on how to get access to your MRIS system and how to submit the data to MRIS.
Okay, moving on. Okay, we are towards the end of our presentation, so I'm going to talk about some upcoming changes. So we have a EDAS phone line that our inspectors and technicians have been using to contact us and work with us when they have a scheduled fieldwork appointment. Lately, we have been having some issues with the phone service, so we are changing the phone service to a different type where they're always be able to reach one of the EDAS engineers to help you support the fieldwork. And the expected implementation date is June, but we are working to implement it sooner, so we don't see any more hiccups during the fieldwork. We're also opening up a new EDAS customer service phone line where you can call and talk to a person and ask questions about your projects. If there is some information that is not in RIMS, or if there is any confusion on the information provided on RIMS. So for that, we are opening a separate phone line for the customer service, and it is not the fieldwork. We want to keep the fieldwork line only for fieldwork, and this is project-related questions or any general questions that you'd like to ask EDAS. And another change that we've been working on is the SC telemetry data validation. This is the external display of the telemetry data. So once we roll this project, you will be able to see the telemetry data, which you cannot see today, on how much how much your plant is generating, or whether your breakers are closed or open. So all the information that we provide today on the telemetry data during a 72-hour test or a point-to-point test, or even after the post-commercial, you'll be able to see that data and then resolve a lot of these issues before even EDAS notifying you. Okay, I'm at the end of the presentation. So at the end of this presentation, I have included some helpful links, which I have shown you on the website. So you can have this presentation and look up some of the information that you need more information about. So some of them are the certification, fieldwork guide, fieldwork appointment scheduling link, procedures for the rig testing, exemptions, and the BPMs, and various checklists. That's the end of EDAS presentation. I'm going to pause for any questions, or else we'll proceed with the next presentation. Do you see anything in the chat?
No, no questions in chat.
Okay.
Awesome. Great. Thank you, Priyanka. There are for those on the WebEx, I did submit those links from the last 3 slides, so feel free to click on those on your chat. The next presentation we have coming up is for Ali. He'll make his way up here, and we'll go ahead and start with his portion.
Morning, everyone. Is this the last one before lunch? Tough spot to be in. So, love to get a indication of where the audience is. How many of you have heard of primary frequency response or know some of the basics about it? Okay, so there's some hands going up, but majority may not know exactly what we're talking about. So I'll try to keep it at a high level, and feel free if you want to dig deeper into the topic, feel free to go ahead and raise your hand at any time to talk about it. And the first order is for me to learn how to operate this. How do I advance it? Oh, the clicker. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So a couple of terms that I wanted to define here on the topic. And again, if you really haven't been involved and engaged with this topic, some of this might be just another language for you. But primary frequency response is, if you look at, well, let me just take a step back and say this, my presentation only pertains to storage, battery storage facilities, and not any other fuel type that you might be involved and engaged with. But if you kind of, take a step back and look at a traditional thermal unit that's operating on a system, there's a magnetic bond that is in place between that unit and the interconnection. And if the frequency of the interconnection were to drop, that magnetic bond would automatically make the generating facility to produce a little bit more energy and put into the grid. Now, there are standards out there that define what frequency response is. Excuse me. And it really is just your natural expected response to the deviations in frequency. There is a dead band established around nominal, and most of the time that nominal is 60 hertz. But if there's a fast, there are times when that nominal changes because of time error correction. But majority of the time that nominal is at 60 hertz. And there's a dead band established, and in California it is 0.036 hertz. If the frequency stays within that 0.036 hertz, you're not expected to provide much of a frequency response. And that is just to make sure your units are not really gyrating with a change in the frequency. And how fast you end up, providing frequency response, or what your unit's acceleration is, if it goes outside the dead band, is determined by your droop setting. And with IBRs, everything is software and hardware driven. The controller will establish what your frequency response is going to be. It is looking at what the frequency on the interconnection is, and as soon as it goes outside of that dead band, it goes ahead and provides the appropriate frequency response. And part of my job during the course of the year is to look at every frequency event and look at the response of every generator, including battery storage and thermal, hydro, all the other field types, and determine whether or not they're providing the right frequency response. As you know, in California, we have a large amounts of solar and wind that produces capable, which means that they are not necessarily frequency responsive since they're producing at their max curve. They can give you more energy if the frequency to drop. So it becomes absolutely critical that we get our battery storage and other field types that have some capacity to give us frequency response right in order to maintain the reliability of the interconnection. That's why we're actually paying a lot of close attention to battery right now, because we're getting a lot of it coming on the system. And as you will see, we're not getting a consistent response from these units. So just at a high level, the frequency response is the first line of defense against an event that happens on the grid. And if you look at the FERC Order 842, any of the resources that signed an LGIA after the date of that order is responsible for providing frequency response. I think that, if I'm not mistaken, the order came out in 2018. I may be wrong on that. I'm just going with my memory. And then there are two BAL standards that the Cal ISO is subjected, and we get audited and looked at through various metrics and various tests to make sure we're following, which is the BAL 003, which is the interconnection frequency response, and BAL 001, which is the power balancing. In other words, how well we're doing in balancing the system. Frequency response is the first order of balancing if you were to look at it. So if something were to happen, it's that automatic response from your units that will be the first order of response. The second order will be the AGC units, then the operators, then the market. So there's a hierarchy on how we go about in trying to balance the grid. But the automatic one and the most important one is really the frequency response. And it's critical that the units that are obligated to provide it are providing it. Now, the megawatt response of a resource is a function of your droop setting. And if you were to look at the droop, it's like, how fast your car is accelerating. It's how quickly does your unit provide the required megawatt, and how many megawatts is it going to provide? And the availability of stored energies in a case of a battery storage is your state of charge. If you had the state of charge, you may not have the state of charge, or you may have indicated that during a specific range of a state of charge, outside of which you may not be able to provide frequency response. All of that is in your LGIA when you signed the LGIA agreement with us. And your available headroom, if you're on the top, if you're a solar unit, for example, you're producing as capable, you don't have any headroom to provide frequency response. And then there are physically or manually set restrictions. Some might be for good reason, others may not be for good reason. I'll talk a little bit about that as well. And then in the case of IBRs, the control mode of the resource, actually thermal will have the same control mode issue as well. But it's, I'm going to talk about today about your droop settings and your control mode of the resource, because a lot of times what I'm seeing is that on the battery storage units, they're not set correctly in California. I also want to say that other ISOs out there may have different requirements to what Cal ISO has. And so you may come across, if you're operating in various different ISO regions, that you will come across different settings. And if you want to talk about those settings, I'm available at lunchtime and we can even talk about those. A lot of words here. That's essentially the LGIA sections that will and tariff sections that are talking about frequency response and your obligation under that. But what is of a little bit of a controversy is the fact that a lot of the units in California have the droop set based on IEEE 2800. If you look at IEEE 2800, it will say from 0 to essentially what ICR is equivalent to your PMAX. Is what your droop setting should be. If you look at FERC Order 842, and if you look at what our LGI requirement are, it's a nameplate capacity. And those are not necessarily the same. Your nameplate is not necessarily 0 to Pmax, which is what IEEE 2800 is doing, is saying it should be, your droop setting should be. Again, if you're not in the weeds, a lot of this may not make sense, but if you're involved with projects, you got to make sure that your projects have the correct droop settings on them. And you can talk to the folks, the controller manufacturers that you're working with that are putting those controllers in, and to make sure that you've got the right droop settings in. And I will show you how easy it is for me to figure out what your droop settings are by looking at some examples here. The first example I'm going to bring up, now let me kind of, I guess, set the graph up for you. These are specific frequency events. The blue is when the frequency, something happened on an interconnection, typically generation that dropped off, that dropped the frequency, and it goes below the dead band. And then the orange over here is the output of the unit. And in this case, what you're seeing, again, every example I have a couple of examples I'm going to go through. These are battery storage units that I've used here in this example. And then if you look at the droop calculation, which is on the right, and you put it through, and how much response you provide is directly a function of how low the frequency went and what your droop setting was. And in this case, the frequency in this event went down to 5992 hertz, and the unit was a 100 megawatt unit. So you plug that into the capability. And if you were using a 0 to Pmax, which is IEEE 2800, essentially, you're required to provide, based on the math, 1.5 megawatt. The actual frequency response that this unit provided was 1.54 megawatt that I saw in the graph based on our telemetry. It's that simple for me to look at the your output, plug it into the equation, and say, oh, This one is operating on a droop setting of 0 to Pmax. The next example I want to show you is the bad one. A lot of the facilities that are co-located and don't want to charge from the grid because of investment tax credit purposes might be setting the droop to this. And they push back when I argue with them. And then I just refer them to 842 or our tariff for them to understand what their obligations are. We definitely are going to come after you if you've got your droop setting set to set point. And we're ramping up on our process internally to get the legal involved and to be able to kind of come out and give you a warning, and then to say, if you're not doing things properly, this is what the next step is going to be. In this example, the unit is operating at -26 and it's charging at 26 megawatts. And you're looking at the actual PFR they provided was 0.3 megawatts. And I've got 3 different scenarios that's very common in California: the 0 to Pmax, the Pmin to Pmax, and a set point as droop. What the set point means is wherever it's operating, wherever the unit is operating at the time of the frequency event, the capability of the unit is calculated as wherever it's operating at. If it's a 100 megawatt unit, and this was actually larger than 100 megawatts, it's a 132 megawatt unit, then the capability of the unit for the purpose of providing frequency response is looked at where the set point is, which is at this point about 26 megawatts. So you're shortchanging the interconnection significantly by putting it your setting at set point. Why are people putting a set point? Because units, when they're sitting at 0, they don't want to provide frequency response. I understand that you may not in the middle of the night to be providing frequency response. Change your controller logic that says, if I'm at 0, then 0. Don't put your set point on the droop, your droop on set point to accomplish that, because you're shortchanging the interconnection. This unit has the worst of all the scenarios established for its droop setting. And it's that easy for us to be able to tell. So you're not going to get away with it. I mean, once the frequency event happens, we look and we'll find out and we'll come out. So do it right from the beginning if you're involved and engaged with this project right now, the battery storage. And this one is an example of a droop setting from 0 to Pmax, which we love. I mean, Pmin to Pmax, I should say. And you can, again, see how easy it is to do the calculation and figure out where the droop setting on that unit is right now. And the last one I want to talk about is really important and critical. And vast majority of the battery storage units have their controller mode set such that the AGC is the primary control mode when they're under AGC. In this example, you got 2 units, similar size, same frequency event, and both of them, the AGC had them set at approximately 0 when the frequency event happened. The unit on the left provided frequency response. The unit on the right did not. Majority of battery storage units right now are set up such that when you're on AGC, you're not providing frequency response. Now, there's only one other ISO that I'm aware of that doesn't require to provide frequency response when you're on AGC, and that's ISO New England. Every other ISO that I've spoken with, you're supposed to be on the left, not on the right. So please make sure that primary frequency response is your primary control mode on your controllers, and it has to be additive to whatever the set point is. So if the AGC has you operating at, let's say, 20 megawatts, and a frequency event happens and you're obligated to provide 1 megawatt, you go to 21 megawatts. So it's additive. It doesn't replace it. And given the fact that most of the regulation in California right now is being provided by battery storage units, this is really important for us as well. That was my last slide. I know we got into a little bit of a technical issue, topics here. Are there any questions that you have? Yes.
these probably aren't questions that you were hoping to be asked, but and they're somewhat unrelated. I guess one thing I would just note that there's not a lot of controls functionality interface through the NRI process. So as someone who tries to help projects meet requirements, I would welcome any involvement to kind of help point them at the right requirements through the NRI process, just generically. But then actually my question is really, I just need some fuel for a CPUC conversation that I hope to have a little bit later. But both with respect to primary frequency response and frequency regulation through AGC, I was just wondering if you could confirm the approximate timeframes of like unit discharge, right? We're looking at 1 to 2 second discharges for primary frequency response of real power. And then I'm just mostly hoping that you could tell me from like a frequency regulation perspective, what is the time duration when you're just doing small frequency corrections that you dispatch units?
Well, when you look at this graph, see, look at the unit at the left. Look how beautiful that response is in relation to the frequency.
Right.
If you were to look at a hydro or a thermal, you see a delayed response. Now, the actual frequency response period that we're looked at under BAL 003, again, I'm not involved in that process, but if I'm not mistaken, it starts from 4 seconds out to 30 or 40 seconds out. So that, my tool over here goes around 40 seconds or something. I look at that.
I had that unofficially. That was the number I was looking for. I just wanted you to confirm it. Thank you.
And so, if you're responding in that time frame, there's a check mark for you. But IBRs are so beautiful in their response, as you can see here, that, and I have another presentation that has examples of a battery storage that has a 4 second delay. And I contacted that unit saying, not that there's anything wrong, but why do you have this 4 second delay given that vast majority of the units I look at is right on? And they investigated, it turned out to be the relationship between the controller and the inverter. And sometimes one of them is not,
Yeah.
So
control system latency type thing.
But from my perspective or our perspective, that is still frequency response. Even though you're out 4 seconds, or even if you're out 15 or 20 seconds, we're not going to ding you for it.
Got it.
The issue here is the magnitude of the response. And that's where there's a lot of, that's what the group determines. And there's a wide variety, including 0. A lot of units may not have that on. Did I answer your question?
Absolutely. And thank you.
Sure. Anyone else? That lunch is getting to you, isn't it? All right. Well, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. If there are any questions, I'll be downstairs. Feel free to stop by and we can chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali. For the stakeholder who just spoke, what organization were you representing for those on the WebEx?
Sorry. My name is Pat McCarthy. I'm here with GridSme today.
Awesome. Thank you so much for confirming. Just for those who are on the call. So right now we are at pretty much at 11:30. So we will take an hour lunch and come back here like at 12:30. If you could come here a little earlier, but for the speaking, we'll get started at 12:30 exactly so we can move along through our schedule. How does that sound for everyone? Good? Okay, I'll put on a break slide, but at this time, go ahead and to lunch. And then Silas, can we also provide that in the chat for those on the WebEx? We'll be returning back here about 12:30. All right, everyone, we'll get started. Silas, is the recording ready for us?
Yes, the recording is on.
Great, thank you. Welcome back, everyone, for your lunch. We'll get started with, I'm presenting Drew Thompson here for the Grid of Operations role. He'll go over this next topic.
All right, thank you, Brenda. Thanks for having me, everybody. Sounds like you guys had some good conversation and presentations today already. Mike? Test, test.
Silas, can you hear Drew's mic?
Test, 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 test.
Yep,
test.
coming through loud and clear.
All right, sorry about that. Yeah, so thanks for having me. I've worked with ops readiness, operations compliance, and customer experience. They've kind of gave me some guidance on materials to put in as well. So it was a good collaborative effort, and I thank everybody for having Grid Operations speak here today. As Brenda spoke, I'm Drew Thompson. I'm a lead generation dispatcher here. I've been here for 9 years, in operations for all that time, but in the control room on the generation desk for 4 years, total span in the control room 7 years. So I've got to see a lot of evolution of our mix of resources, change in weather patterns. So really want to kind of capture some of the things that we've seen in NRI in the resource testing process and give you guys hopefully a good operational perspective on what we do on a day-to-day basis. So some housekeeping. I'm sure you guys have seen this slide multiple times today. If you have any questions, please raise your hands, talk in the microphone, WebEx, you guys can chat and ask questions as needed. Some of the objectives I'd like to kind of go over today. Again, I'm kind of discussing the role of operations as a balancing authority. Many of you may not know what a balancing authority is. That is a NERC-defined entity. That's the entity that I'm going to refer to as much today as possible. We do have other registrations as well here at the ISO, but that's the one I'm going to focus on the most. I'm going to also identify the role and process after sync approval. So that's kind of when operations takes a hold of your resource and starts working with you on as far as the testing goes. And as of course, unit testing and expectations prior to post COD. COD has kind of been talked about today. That's commercial operation date. So I'll talk about those parameters as well. So CAISO, this is our main. This is very high level, but this is kind of what we do. We maintain the reliability of the grid. We manage the flow of electricity. We oversee the planning transmission process. And we also operate the wholesale electric market, which also is WEIM, as many of you may know. And we're a registered NERC entity. If you don't know what NERC is, it's the North American Reliability Corporation. They're the ones who oversee us. And then on top of them is FERC. So this is an overview of our grid. I want to kind of give you guys this big picture of kind of what we deal with on a day-to-day basis, kind of what our energy looks like, what's changing, and then we'll discuss more of the actual unit testing process as we go. But California, we really consider California as like 3 major load centers. Obviously, you can tell San Francisco, Los Angeles, and San Diego. Those are our biggest load pockets in California, made up of Pacific Gas and Electric, Edison, and San Diego. Those are our 3 main PTOs that we work with in those areas. We have a lot of hydropower in the eastern mountain range along the Sierra Nevada coastline. This year, we're actually going to have some hydro. We got some good rain. As the drought years go, as you would know and expect, we don't have as much hydro. This is going to be a good hydro year, and we've already seen that summer, the snow runoff already happened, so we're getting a good hydropower. We have 1 nuclear power plant left in California. It's Diablo Canyon. Current retirement, it's still being discussed, but it looks like maybe 2030, but that is still pending, so don't want to put any hard nose on that one yet. So that's still being discussed. The PDCI, we have a DC intertie that goes from north to south, and it's that pink line on the graph. That brings a lot of hydro generation into, as you can see, LA basin. So that's a heavy load pocket in that LA area. And I don't know if you can tell on this graph too well from where you guys are seeing fitting, but the blue lines and red lines are transmission lines. So those are our major corridor transmission lines. The 500 is indicated in red. Those are our big capacity, basically transmission lines, obviously move a lot of power, come from all the way from Canada through Washington to Oregon, all the way into California. And then you can see in the eastern side below down the desert southwest, we have a lot more 500 kV coming in from Arizona into the Southern California area. So that's kind of how our transmission is set up. You can see they're all tied into the heavy load pocket areas. We do still have the world's largest geothermal system. It's geysers. It is near Napa Valley. I'm sure many of you have heard Napa Valley of the great wine country. That is still the biggest thermal generation site. Natural gas. So many of you have heard of natural gas, obviously. So that is definitely located near the big coastlines, near the load centers. We still have a lot of natural gas units, large units, but a lot of them have been retiring due to maintenance costs. And as you know, the influx of solar and wind and energy storage, also known as batteries. And then solar and wind, we are fortunate to have desert areas where we can put solar and wind sites, unlike areas in the East Coast where they don't have those types of areas where they can just populate those areas with solar and wind. So do we have any questions about the topography, geography of the system? All right, I will move on. So I wanted to give you some 2023 statistics, but as many of you know, dealing with our interconnection process, we're moving really fast. These stats, I'll touch on these. So our peak demand last year was 44,000 megawatts. And I don't know if you can see previous year right there. Previous year was the biggest load day we had in our history, 52,000 megawatts. So you may wonder, why isn't load increasing? Does anybody know maybe why load wasn't as high this last summer as the previous summer? Anybody have an idea? Everybody went to Florida? It was actually a mild summer. We didn't have a lot of heat waves. We didn't have a lot of really days that led on, really where we see the biggest load days, like 52,000 megawatt day. That was multiple days of a heat wave. So by the time of that end of that heat wave, that 52,000 megawatt day, people were just like, we've had it. Like we need to turn our ACs on. Like we're hot. So that was a huge day. I was on the desk that day. I came in on night shift. I woke up to come in on night shift, looked at the app, and I saw that we were already over 50,000. I said, okay, walking into some fun. So it was a historic night. It was awesome to see. But yeah, it surprised many of us. But as you know, with the electrification of electric vehicles and just overall demand on the system, that number is going to increase as the years go on. Batteries, that's the talk of many of our discussions, right? Added capacity in 2023, so 2,600 megawatts. Previous year, 1,900. I was on shift yesterday. We have over 10,000 megawatts of batteries as of yesterday. And so that just shows how fast we are moving with energy storage. And that we'll talk about in future slides, the challenges of energy storage. So 2023, here's our stats as far as installed renewable resources. As you can see, solar, 18,000 megawatts. That's a lot. I don't know how many of you follow other states and other parts of the US, but 18,000 megawatts is a good amount. ERCOT's also has a big number as well, but a lot of volatility with solar, right? So we got wind, and then as you know, I just stated, as of February, the 7,200 megawatts of energy storage, that number is now obsolete. We're now up to over 10,000 megawatts. So role of the CAISO generation dispatcher. I'm not up here to talk about my job particularly, but I felt like I wanted to express, when you're doing your resource testing, my job is a single point of contact while you're testing your resource. We're reaching out to the scheduling coordinator, talking to you about what you need to do, what your expectations are. So I really wanted to kind of show you guys and gals what we do on a day-to-day basis to kind of help you understand when we're calling you and giving you instructions, why we might be giving you those instructions. So our two major roles are both mitigation and balancing. To sum it up in a very simple way, mitigation and balancing, two things. For the mitigation piece, we are managing the flow of electricity, as we talked about in the past slides. We are making and ensuring that we're not overloading any transmission equipment. So we're maintaining the reliability of the system. So in order to do that, the resource that you have may be a solution to fix that problem, or you may be contributing to that problem. So when we're calling you, telling you you need to do a specific action, we're usually doing it, we are doing it for a purpose. There's something that's going on the system, and we need you guys to follow. So our communication chain, as a gen dispatcher, we'll talk to our transmission side. So our transmission side will validate, and they're watching what elements on the system are overloaded. They'll give us a call or talk to us in the control room and say, hey, we need to mitigate this via generation dispatch. They are talking to the transmission owners, the utilities. So that's kind of how the communication chain goes in the control room. Scheduling coordinator and a gen dispatcher talk about your resource. So that scheduling coordinator needs to know everything about your specific resource, because we tell them instructions, they then will call the site will call back. We communicate directly with the scheduling coordinator. That is the key point, and we'll talk more about that here shortly. On the balancing piece, so we're mitigating, we're making sure we're not overloading any limits. We're also having to balance real-time supply with demand. So in a very easy economic kind of perspective, you have demand, you need to meet that demand with supply. The reason being is we have to maintain the system at 60 hertz. Has everybody heard of 60 hertz frequency? Is that something that people are kind of familiar with? Perfect. So that's the gauge in which we have to maintain the system. 60 hertz gets out of whack, we start having instability issues. So when we're balancing and we need resources to move for capacity, we're reaching out to those scheduling coordinators and talking with them. When our balancing in our BA starts to impact frequency as a whole, then we start communicating with the reliability coordinator. So these are all NERC-defined entities, and we all have compliance standards in which we need to maintain. So that is the kind of the communication chain, and I just want to let you guys know that that is the broad kind of spectrum of what we're dealing with on a day-to-day, minute-by-minute basis. So when we're talking to you on your resource, these are the kind of the things that we're dealing with. So I'm hoping that you kind of understand the severity and the need for urgency on these things. So the NRI team made a really cool process map, and I really wanted to highlight this because I know it gets hard with the flow charts and the process maps to kind of understand where we are in the whole process. So we are in trial operations right here. This is what we're talking about specifically. So you already got your sync date, you already got your approval, then you come down into real time. And here's the process map that NRI gave today. So we're here, right here in the energy testing process. So in this process is when you're going to be directly communicating, the scheduling coordinators are going to be directly communicating with the generation dispatchers in the control room. So I wanted to put this, any questions so far? I don't want to go too fast here. I want people to have questions if they do. Nope, okay. So I wanted to put these icons on here as we go through the presentation, just to kind of make it as simple as possible, kind of where we are at in the process. So really the test energy process starts 7 days out. So our procedures state when you get that sync approval, you can now submit your test schedule plans 7 days out. And then there is a process in which we, the generation dispatchers, start talking with the scheduling coordinators, and we'll go through that. So as I stated, grid ops starts dealing with the sites after sync. The approval must be given prior to resource testing. You can't just test without approval. I mean, that should be pretty understood, right? So the scheduling coordinator, they will submit the new generator test energy type OMS card. We're going to go over a template. So if you don't know what that is, we'll go over that in detail here. I'll go over some of the fields and some of the important information on those cards. But per our procedures, you want to put the resource availability to 0. And then you want to put your NRI template. So the same test and energy template that you have in your NRI process, you want to put that in the OMS card. You also want to put the test schedule for each hour, whatever you're doing, discharge, charge, your solar site, whenever you plan to produce, you really want to put that information into that OMS card. And you want to communicate any changes to that test schedule prior to the test date. So if you submit that OMS card and a day before, you're like, hey, we need to change the schedule. Please update that OMS submittal, and then we'll communicate more in real time if there's any kind of changes. So we're still on that submit test schedule review stage. So we're in the D2, D1 horizon. And what that really means is we're 2 days out. 2 days out, the generation dispatcher, part of our nightly review process, we'll start going through your test energy cards. So we'll make sure that you have a good description on what you're supposed to be doing as far as testing. If it's not present, then we'll contact the scheduling coordinator. And granted, this is night shift when we're calling. So oftentimes the answer we get is, oh, I'm sorry, day shift guy should have done that. We'll get back to you tomorrow. So just know that we're looking out for that. We need to have a test plan. So 2 days out, we typically start looking at that. And we'll start reaching out to your scheduling coordinators, getting those schedules submitted. 1 day out, if you don't have that test schedule submitted, we'll say, hey, just letting you know, tomorrow morning looks like you guys want to test. You don't have a test schedule on your card. Until then, we're not going to test. So we really need a test schedule. You're putting megawatts on the grid. You potentially are causing a reliability situation, and we should know what your plans are. Does that make sense? So here's an outage example. So I understand that some of the scheduling coordinators use APIs that communicate with OMS. So your view of this may be slightly different, but the information in the field should be similar. So this is a OMS submittal. This is for a battery site. I'm having kind of a hard time seeing it on the presentation. Can you guys see it okay? It's kind of small, huh? See if we can zoom in there. All right, so this is a 2-month test card, so the start and end time. I'm trying to show right here, the availability is a 0. So that allows the market to know that this is not available for market dispatch. So it zeroes that out. The external notes, as you see popped out there, have all of the impacted hours and all the test plans for each individual hour. So you can see hour ending 6 on Sunday, they plan to charge 175 megawatts. So that's a term that we'll go over too, charge and discharge. So don't be worried if you're not unsure what that terminology means. But as you can see in the short description and the external notes, they put in the NRI information. So we know basically where it connects to, what the capacity of the resource is. So we have all that information. So when we're doing our D2 and D1 reviews, that test plan of hour by hour, what you plan to test is what we're looking for. And if we don't see that, that's when the scheduling coordinator will get a phone call and we'll inquire about that. Thank you, Brenda. Perfect. So this is the slide I was talking to you guys about with the charge and discharge terminology. So initially, this was a hard kind of terminology for all of us to get. With a solar or a thermal site, you don't talk charge and discharge type terminology. So discharge is, in this case, I gave you an example of a 250 megawatt battery. Pmax is 250 megawatts. Pmin is negative 250. So you got a discharge right there from 0 to 200, 250. That's what we consider a discharge. So when you're putting megawatts out on the system and you're not load, that's a discharge. A charge is 0 to negative 250. So anything in that range, we refer to that as a charge. And notice on both of those, I stated a linear ramp, not instantaneous. So that has been a big challenge with many of the inverter-based batteries. Many of you, how many have a battery site that you guys manage or are aware of, or you do? Do they move relatively fast? Can they? I'm sorry to call on you, sir. Yeah. Yeah. So batteries have a ramp rate unlike any other resource. They can move extremely quick. One of the first batteries that we had was down in San Diego. It was a 250 megawatt battery. And I recall doing a test. I called them. I said, hey, I want you to perform an unannounced test on them. I need you to go to 0 to 250 megawatts. Started the unannounced test. All of a sudden, like a light switch, 0, boom, 250. I was like, whoa, what did I just see? Was this real? I called the site. I said, did you really just go to 0 to 250 like a light switch, like an instantaneous? They said, oh, yeah, we did. I said, no, you're supposed to ramp. You know how to ramp? And they're like, we were never told that. It's like, no, yeah, you can't have 250 megawatts instantaneously like come on the system. Just 0 to 250. That's yeah, it's cool. It's neat, but for reliability, you just shot our system and our frequency through the roof. So that's something that we've been talking to a lot with the scheduling coordinators. And when they call and they say, hey, we want to do a capacity test. You see this battery right here that I just gave example of, 250 megawatts. Okay, look at the delta between Pmin and Pmax, 500 megawatts. Does anybody know what the average energy demand is in megawatts for San Francisco? Just throw some numbers out there, see if you can get it. So San Francisco right now, their megawatt output for demand on what they need to serve energy in San Francisco, it's anywhere between 300 to 600 megawatts. So this one resource can swing that instantaneously. So I just want to put that in perspective. When you swing that many megawatts instantaneously, it's seen across the whole system. And we actually had an instance where we had a battery down in Southern California start to oscillate. And by oscillate, I'm meaning rapid movement in an uncontrollable manner, 0 to 100 fast as it could go. And with inverter-based generation, it's extremely quick. That was seen across the whole Western interconnection. Entities up in the Northwest started taking mitigation actions. So when I called the scheduling coordinator to report what they just did, there was a odd silence at the end of the phone when I said, you just caused, we need you to come offline immediately. And they were like, well, why? Reliability. And they were like, well, why? It's like, you just caused a WEC-wide disturbance. And immediately that resource obviously got offline. But the severity of how fast these batteries move needs to be understood. So we'll continue on with this discussion here shortly. So now I just want to address some of the things that we've been seeing in the NRI process that have been challenges for us. Communications. Communications has been a struggle. We directly talk with the scheduling coordinator. And oftentimes when we talk to the scheduling coordinator about test plans or what's the ramp rate of this resource, what do they plan on doing as far as a capacity test when they call, they have very little information. They're like, well, I don't know. I got to call somebody. So they're not really it doesn't feel like they're really in the loop on what the plan is for the testing. Coordinating any changes approved to the CAISO. So we'll have sites, we see the test plan, we've gone through D2, D1, we see the test plan. The scheduling coordinator calls that day and says, hey, we want to test today. It's like, okay, per your OMS, everything looks good, go ahead and test. Well, say for instance, they have a charge of 200 megawatts they're testing. And we start getting close to peak, hour earning 20. Meanwhile, we're pulling load, we're moving generation, and all of a sudden they want to test 300 megawatts. Well, we see them in the control room, but we didn't get a phone call. We look at the test schedule. We didn't see that's what they wanted to do. So we call them and say, hey, what are you guys doing? Oh, we just wanted to test another hour. Who'd you call? Oops, sorry, we apologize. It's like, no, you can't do that. You gotta update your test schedule. If it's in real time, you gotta give us a call. It's easy, it's a 2-second phone call, validate. If we can't make the arrangement, then we will let you know when a better time would be. But you gotta communicate those types of changes. Telemetry. Does everybody kind of have an idea of what telemetry is? So telemetry is basically the data that we're seeing, the output of that resource. We've had some bad telemetry situations where we get calls and they're like, hey, we want to test. It's like, yeah, but all your telemetry is bad. Yeah, we know, we'll give you an update. It's like, you're a new resource. We don't know capabilities of your resource yet. We can't see you. Do you have a good telemetry on your end? Oh, we don't have the telemetry yet. Like, what? You're the scheduling coordinator, you don't have telemetry for your site, you can't see them? I'll have to call the site and see what their output is. Those are the types of cases that we just say, you know what, we can't have that. Nope, sorry, we apologize, but maybe we can reschedule you when your telemetry is good. So we need to have good telemetry, we have to have the good visibility, and we need to know what your good test plan is. The third point, control of the resource. You must have control of the resource at all times, plain and simple. Even in those times that you have the oscillation, like I spoke about before, they were able to remove that site offline within seconds of us giving the operating instruction. There are times when we call and they're like, oh, all of our SCADA techs are remote. It may take a little bit. Like, you're testing the resource. You don't have people on site. So these are the types of questions, and we really shouldn't be having to ask you guys why you don't have people on site. If you're testing your resource and you're a new resource, we are assuming you have all the personnel in play, ready to go to do an efficient test. We shouldn't have to ask those types of questions in real time. And like I mentioned, the ability to ramp to a 5-minute dispatch. We do talk about that quite a bit now in real time when we're talking to scheduling coordinators to ensure, especially when they call for capacity tests. Hey, we're a new resource. We want to do a capacity test. We want to charge from 250. We want to go up to positive 250. That's when we have those discussions. Are you going to be ramping to your 5-minute dispatch? So the anticipation is when you go COD, you're going to be getting a 5-minute dispatch if you're providing energy. So what better time is it to practice that when you're testing? So you need to have the ability to ramp that resource. Or if it's an instantaneous test, you need to explain what you're doing. If you're doing a load rejection test or something like that, you need to explain what the ramping capability and what your intentions are. That has to be communicated. As I mentioned, and this gentleman pointed out, batteries have distinct ramp rates, extremely fast. They have consuming modes and they have discharging modes, so generating and consuming. So it's not like a normal solar site where when the sun's up, the solar's on. There's definitely a whole different element to testing batteries. And then solar testing. We really want to encourage your solar testing because we understand you're trying to develop your forecasting models. You're trying to get that good data. So we really don't want to impede on your solar testing. But if you are causing a reliability issue, we need you to respond to those instructions immediately. And we'll talk about that. So communications. This is probably one of my favorite slides because you wouldn't believe the type of people that give us a call in the control room. So I've gotten calls from commissioning groups, operator groups, SCADA engineers at an airport, you name it. The scheduling coordinator has no idea what's going on. I'm getting a call from a manager of the site who's actually on site. I'm getting a call from a SCADA tech. So multiple people calling me, hey, I need to test this resource. And we had an instance where we needed to verify, we weren't getting good rig data. And we needed to verify certain rig points. And I got a call from an individual who was like, hey, yeah, I'm the SCADA guy. I can fix that. Okay, I need you to do this. Oh, I'm not in the location. I need to log into my laptop. So it was all over the place. We're trying to get you guys to do your testing. But when we're getting calls from multiple entities and we're trying to just communicate with the scheduling coordinator on what a testing plan is, and when we got business managers are probably, I have to say, probably one of the worst because they call very demanding. Why isn't my resource able to test? And you're just like, okay, there's multiple things why your resource can't test. They don't have good telemetry, their rig's down. These are the reasons why. And they won't get off the phone with you until they have a good answer. And then 5 seconds later, you get a call from a SCADA tech. Oh, hey, I think I got that resolved. You know, we're in real time, and I wanted to show you guys what we deal with on a day-to-day basis for mitigating and providing capacity. Now we're getting calls from multiple people regarding your one resource. Your one resource is important. I'm not making that feel, I don't want you guys to feel like your one resource isn't important. Well, we manage a 52,000 megawatt day. The 5 megawatt of your testing site with the multiple phone calls is extremely distracting. Meanwhile, your scheduling coordinator has no idea what's going on. They're not getting the information that they need. So by all means, please go through your scheduling coordinator, give them all the information about your anticipated testing, the status of what's going on with your telemetry, the updates, because that's who we're talking to. And even though I love your business managers calling us, they don't talk to us on a day-to-day basis. We talk to the scheduling coordinators. They know what kind of stuff we look for. They know what stuff we need. They use the same terminology. So it's much more efficient, much more efficient. Well, again, we appreciate the phone calls. So we're still in that pre-COD. There are times in which we get some people who are like, hey, why did you not approve my testing for today? So we may not approve testing for sufficient transmission capacity. We'll tell you on the phone that it's for reliability. If we have a reliability issue and we have congestion, we will deny your testing for the day. We will try everything in our power to make that testing happen. We can run real-time studies. We can look at what we can do and maybe arrange a different time for your testing. We understand if it's solar, you're going to obviously be testing during the day, but we will try to make recommendations and help you out as much as we can. We know you want to test your site. The quicker you get through your NRI process, we understand that that's the goal for you. We understand that. But there are times where we're dealing with a transmission element that's limiting your resource, and we need to not have that part of the issue. So that phone call will be given to your scheduling coordinator. So performance for reliability. This one is critical. So us as the balancing authority, as a NERC entity, we can give operating instructions. Everyone seems to be pretty aware of what an operating instruction is. But we need to know, and you need to know, that following those operating instructions is very crucial. If you don't follow these operating instructions, we will have to be reporting you. There's other things that come with that as far as NERC evaluations, FERC evaluations. So operating instructions are our last resort. When we give you an operating instruction to either come offline or to follow a dispatch, that has to be followed. That is paramount. If not, we've had cases, and we don't want to do this. We don't want to kick your resource off the grid, but we will coordinate with the transmission side. And if you can't get that resource offline we can and we have the authority to open breakers to remove your resource from the system. Again, that's our last resort. We don't want to do that, but we will. And we have gotten to those means. So again, must have control of resource at all times. If you don't have control of the site, please make that known. Don't try to hide it, because when you try to hide it and say, hey, it's going to take 2 hours to remove that site from offline. If we give you an operating instruction to remove that within 10 minutes, that has to be done within 10 minutes. Or we're going to take those other means by contacting transmission and removing that. We're not doing that to punish you. We're serving a reliability purpose, and we have NERC requirements to fulfill as well. So I hope that's clear. All right, so we got all the testing fun done, right? So we went through testing, you guys did all your checks and points, you went through the NRI process, you got approval. Operations, we're not giving you the approval, that's through the NRI process, but we obviously worked through that trial operation phase. Now you've been given COD, so you're here. Now I want to kind of talk about some of the expectations when you're COD and what that looks like. Any questions pre-COD, resource testing wise, that we want to touch on before we move on to COD? All right, you guys are just either really in tune or you're tired from lunch. Maybe a little bit of both, right? All right, so expectations for COD. So commercial, you're commercial, you made it. Well, these are some of the challenges that we're seeing lately. Performance for reliability. So the ability to follow 5-minute DOTs accurately. So DOTs are your dispatch operating targets. So through ADS, you guys may have a different dispatching system that interacts with ADS, but we refer to it as ADS. That dispatch system will send out you 5-minute DOTs. If you're not following those 5-minute DOTs, we see it. We will call you if there's a reliability issue or there's congestion going on, we'll give you a call to remind you of those DOTs. Linear ramping. Linear ramping has to continue throughout your testing process and as your COD. We do not do instantaneous ramping. The light switch on and off, 0 to 250, yeah, it's cool, but causes a lot of problems, and that's not what we're here about. So you want to follow those DOPs. So DOPs are essentially the operating targets within that 5-minute DOT. So it's a nice linear ramp. It calculates based on your ramp rate. So that is it's a nice smooth way to go to dispatch. And you make everybody happy with that. The next point is do not exceed DOT when follow DOT. So I want to kind of explain that. That may be kind of confusing, right? When we have congestion on the system, you are now a COD resource. You are now participating in the market. If there is congestion on an element, you may receive an ADS, a yes, follow DOT flag, if your resource is contributing to that congestion. It may be telling your resource to increase. It may be telling your resource to decrease. When you're receiving that flag, regardless if you're a VER, a solar site, you need to be following that instruction. If you're not following that instruction, you're basically not following your tariff obligations. You need to follow those dispatches when we are giving you instructions to follow your DOTs at all times. The other piece of that is the operating instruction flag, our yes and ADS. So the generation desk can actually give you verbal operating instructions, which we talked about. So we can call you, give you an operating instruction. There's 3-part communication there. Many of you probably have heard about 3-part. We'll give you that operating instruction verbally, and we expect you to follow either within 10 minutes or whatever timeline that we provide you. But the assumption is that you're going to act on the operating instruction immediately. The other feature that we have, we can actually issue operating instructions through Market. We issue it through Market. It comes out through ADS automatically. There will be a reason, either system reliability, congestion, or overgeneration. Those are the kind of the main components that come in through ADS, but it will say operating instruction yes. That is the same operating instruction as we would give you verbally. That is an operating instruction at which you need to follow during the duration of specified time. You can give us a call. You can have questions about the operating instruction. We can give you information on when we expect that operating instruction to end. But during that duration, that has to be followed. And like I touched on with the variable energy resources, we know with solar, if you're not receiving a follow DOT flag or operating instruction, our policy currently states that you can produce as capable. However, when you're receiving a follow DOT flag or an operating instruction, it is the utmost importance that you follow those instructions immediately. Does that make sense? I appreciate everybody doing the after lunch nod. So again, immediately follow the operating instructions issued by CAISO. You know, when we're giving you an operating instruction, we're not in a good position. So it's not like we're just like, oh, we're just going to give this person operating instruction because they're not following their DOT. There's a really good reason why we're giving you that. We're not in a good spot, so please help us out and you follow that. The other piece that we like is starting up and shutting down timely. We understand for thermal sites, sometimes they have cold starts and things of that such, so they may need to start up a little earlier than their anticipated dispatch. However, for solar, battery, you don't have a cold start. So there's really no reason why you can't follow that dispatch. So if you're getting a DOT and you need to test after that DOT, you need to, and you don't expect to deviate from that DOT, you need to give us a call and explain to us why you need to deviate. Could be you want to test the site, hey, I need to do a capacity test, or I need to do this, I need to do that. Whatever it may be, if you're going to deviate from your DOT, you need to call us in real time. Resource testing should be self-scheduled in market. So now that you're an official resource, if you're doing resource testing and you're a 250 megawatt battery or a 5 megawatt battery, 10 megawatt battery, you should be self-scheduling that energy into the market. The reason being is you're basically providing the market that good optimal solution. We're accounting for that. You should be able to prepare yourself to know when you're going to schedule your energy, and you should have enough time to put that self-schedule in. In addition, unit testing type cards should be submitted as well. The self-schedules and the unit testing card should align and match up. If for whatever reason your testing is like, hey, we need to do a capacity test, we have people on site, but I don't have time for self-schedules, they're going to be here like in 30 minutes. Those are the type of conversations you need to give us a call and we can work something out. But for all intents and purposes, if you're testing your resource, self-scheduled in the market, OMS cards should reflect those test schedules. And then really most importantly, ensure OMS reflects the capacity and availability of the resource. I know that sounds really simplistic and easy, but we've seen this where people aren't updating their OMS cards. It's like, okay, you don't give us the proper input to know what your resource is available, your dispatches are all over the place. So you got to manage your resource, right? You're the scheduling coordinator, you're the site owner. Don't you want to manage your resource to be compensated correctly? So knowing and putting in those OMS updates as quick as possible and as accurately as possible is essential. Some of the scheduling coordinators really have a hard time with batteries as far as submitting OMS cards. So these are the three fields that really we get the most questions about in real time. Load max is a field in OMS. That's going to be for your PMIN and your charging D rates. So anytime you want to basically limit how much that battery can charge as far as output, that's the field that you're going to update there. Max energy, that's where your state of charge D rates are going to be there. So if you need you don't want the battery in the market to charge your battery to full state of charge, you want to have a limit in there, that's the area you want to put that. And then availability, that's your PMAX. So that's basically your output, your discharging D rates. For solar, for thermal, that's what you use basically to your 200 megawatt thermal site or solar site. Can't produce that day. You have inverter problems or you have a CT that's down, that's where you're going to derate that unit to say 100 megawatts. That would be your max availability as far as dispatchable range that day for that resource. Any questions on that? Oh yeah, go for it.
We have a question in the chat from Tanisha Hamilton, if you'd like to go to that one.
Right. So for a new battery resource, is a GRD needed on file before testing? To be honest, does anybody know? I have some back office personnel. I don't know what a GRD stands for.
This is Andrew Brown. Yeah, the GRDT would need to be submitted prior to testing.
Yeah, thanks, Tanisha, for that question. Does that answer your question, Tanisha? Yeah, so Tanisha, just to let you know, in real-time ops, we don't know that field. That's something that sounds like it's done before you come onto unit testing. So that sounds like something that the NRI team would be able to help you out with. But grid operations, we were not familiar with that. And apologize, but it sounds like we got your answer. All right. All right. So expectations for kind of shift gears here. So we talked about energy. Now we're going to talk about ancillary service certified resources. Has anybody heard that term before, ancillary services? So ancillary services, we basically have 4 big products here at the ISO that we deal with in operations. We have spin, non-spin, regulation up, regulation down. So regulation up and regulation down are the kind of the performance items I want to talk about here. So in order to provide regulation, you have to have the ability to ramp on and off AGC, which is automatic generation control, in a DOP linear fashion. We have seen issues with batteries for per se, the NGRs, when they get that initial jump onto AGC. So your regulation awards, let's back up here real quick. Regulation awards are given in every 15 minutes. So for example, right now it's 122. So we're in a 15-minute interval right now. But the next regulation interval is going to be what we would call interval in 1345, 145. We'll not use military time, but that's how we use the market, right? So at 1:30, we're going to have a new batch of regulation resources. At that switchover, there are times where the controllers on the batteries aren't set to ramp to a linear fashion, and they'll jump on, and they'll basically spike the interconnection. Could potentially spike the interconnection, but we see the jump. So that's something that they need to understand. When they set the controller up, they need to ramp into that in a linear fashion. So if you get a test question on anything in life about batteries, linear fashion is what you answer. You do not, instantaneous is the wrong answer every time, okay? All right, perfect. I'm glad you guys are paying attention here. The other thing is stay on AGC for the entire duration of the AS award. So the expectation, the example I just gave you with the time, the expectation is if you're awarded regulation at 1:30 to 1:45, you're on regulation for that whole time. Why? You were awarded regulation for 15 minutes, so you are expected to provide that for 15 minutes. So what we see sometimes is some of the resources have said, well, we're going to program our controllers to wait for this AGC flag in ADS. That is a courtesy feature, to an indication to you that you're going to be put on AGC. That flag comes through. That is not the sole purpose for you to set your controller to follow that. As we all know, automation could potentially not work, right? You need to have manual control to place that unit back on AGC. Over the years, all our thermal sites were able to do this. If they had a problem committing on AGC automatically, We give them the call and they would manually just switch themselves over to AGC. We call some of the battery sites and they're like, all our controls are all automatic. We don't know how to do that. It's like, okay, then you can't provide the regulation that you were just awarded. Therefore, we need to buy that back because you're not able to provide yourself on AGC. So you have to have a way to manually place your unit on AGC. It's a must. You got to have manual control because we all know automation, yes, it's great, it's nice, but when you need a backup, you got to have that manual control. Following 4-second set points accurately. So on AGC, it's much more granular than a 5-minute dispatch. It's every 4 seconds. We're sending a pulse to that unit. Move, move, move. Either up or down, whatever the situation may be. They may be moving up, they may be moving down. 4-second pulses. They need to follow that. Our systems have a mechanism in which if you're not following that 4-second accurately, it will put you in a standby mode. And that alerts me on the desk. Oh, okay, they're not following AGC. I'll look into your telemetry, I'll look at your rig, I'll look at your connectivity, I'll look at your UAGC points, I look at all your data points. Oh, you just haven't switched yourself on AGC, or you're not following. I'll give you a call, the scheduling coordinator call, and then we need to troubleshoot. If they're not able to figure out the problem right then and there, we would ask, they usually put an OMS card in, or we will buy back the AS for that site. So regulation range also, in addition to that, the regulation range needs to reflect the accurate capacity of the unit. We get telemetered in our system, our AGC system, the range in which the site can basically provide. It may be from 100 to say 0. That may be the range. They need to be able to regulate within that range. So there are often times where we get instances where resources are not, their state of charge is low, or they're not managing their max capacity well. So they're not able to provide that regulation. That's basically goes back to managing your resource, knowing the capacity of your resource at all times, and reflecting that via OMS. And that kind of leads into that final bullet point there. Always have OMS reflecting the true capacity of your system. A resource cannot provide AGC with failed telemetry. With failed telemetry, the resource doesn't even move, or we can't even see that it's moving. And then our system says, oh, this has failed telemetry, it's on standby. So then our set points don't even move. So therefore, it's not even provided in regulation. So at that time, OMS submittal with the metering telemetry card will be submitted, and those AS fields need to be set to 0 availability. Most of the scheduling coordinators realize that now, but that is something that kind of gets missed often, where they'll submit a metering telemetry, but they won't zero out the AS availability. So make sure if we're calling you in regards to your AGC and your regulation, that you basically fill that field out. We'll double check it, but again, it's your resource, you need to manage it. I apologize, my clicker's not working here. Perfect. And now this isn't the funnest part of the job, I'd have to tell you that. We'll submit internal tickets flagging your resource inability to perform. So this is a process, like I said, we're managing the system, we're mitigating the system, we're balancing a system, and now we have this resource that's not performing either on regulation, not following on an AGC instruction, and now or operating instruction, and now we have to submit these internal tickets. So these internal tickets, you'll get an official letter, and again, this is not, we just submit the ticket. All the other functions are done by our back office teams. You'll get an official letter stating the importance of reliability and adhering to regulatory standards. You'll need to complete training. You'll need to provide like a detailed root cause analysis that led to the ability to not perform and what has been done to rectify the situation. So we need a good explanation. And in real time, when we call and we troubleshoot and we ask, hey, do you guys know what the situation is? If you're not able to quickly troubleshoot, we need to get that resource offline as quickly as possible if you're causing a reliability problem. Then you need to do these other steps in order to really dive down and figure out what caused those issues. So the penalties are you have potential ancillary service block preventing AS awards. So right now we will buy back your AS for 30 days. Yesterday I had an instance where a resource wasn't following AGC. They weren't even switching on to AGC. Called the scheduling coordinator, said, hey, can you please look into this? I don't know why they're not connecting to AGC. Can you see if they can connect? I didn't even give a call back. He just didn't even call me back. Like, okay, I don't know what that means. Called the SC back again. Yeah, we're really not sure what's going on. It's like, okay. We talked about good communications. It would have been nice to get a phone call back. Meanwhile, I don't have that regulation to manage the system, so we performed a 30-day buyback on that resource. So now you're pulled out of the AS market for 30 days until you perform these steps. There's potential removal from the market. That is something that obviously you and I both don't want to do, but that is a potential. And then for repeat offenders, potential referral to DMM, which is our Department of Market Monitoring. So they are a separate entity in the ISO. They will evaluate the case. If it's basically a blatant not following an operating instruction, they may work in with NERC and FERC, and there's additional penalties that go there, fines and things of that such. So I'm sure you do not want to go down that road. So again, just those good communications, following AGC, following ADS, following our operating instructions, really make everything easier. So just to recap everything that we talked about, again, this proper communications and good communications. If there's something going on with your site, please communicate that. It's encouraged to talk to us. Communicate to control the resource, so operating instructions, respond to those operating instructions in the required time parameters, act on those operating instructions immediately. Right when you receive those, understand that that is needed to be followed right then and there. And must have control of the site at all times. It's not necessary to have a resource just doing whatever it needs to do. You need to follow your dispatch instructions, and you need to have at all times the ability to take that resource offline or to control that site to any kind of instruction. And to ensure proper updates for resource testing and availability. It's your resource. We don't know what the capacity and availability of that resource is, if there's issues going on for that resource. So that's why we use OMS. You guys can accurately reflect that capacity and availability of that unit at all times. The next one is actively monitor your resource. So these are just some questions that we sometimes ask. Who's actually running this resource? Who has control? Can I manually place my resource on AGC? So these are some of the things that, as a scheduling coordinator, as an asset owner, as a grid manager, as a generation owner, these are some of the things that if you have an asset and a resource, you really need to tackle and understand that these are at the utmost importance. And if needed, can I take the site offline within 10 minutes? So we'll often ask, if we know a resource has had issues following dispatch instructions, if they do all the proper training again and they come back, our grid operations managers give us approval to let this resource test again, we'll ask that. Are you sure that you can bring that site offline within 10 minutes? And that is to be expected at all times. If you're wanting to do some light reading this afternoon after lunch, this afternoon on your drive home, not on your drive home. Actually, if you have a self-driving car, you may be able to read some procedures on the way home. Really time efficient, read and drive. But on your time, these are some referral materials to read. These are our operating procedures. So when we're talking with your scheduling coordinators and referring procedures, as far as resource testing, these are the materials that we reference. These are public operating procedures. So any one of you can read this. It's on kaiso.com. And most importantly, please share this information with your resource operators. Oftentimes, it seems like the people in real time, even here, we don't always get the big picture or the information that we need. So there's times where we're like, hey, we gave this presentation at a stakeholder meeting. And they're like, well, I didn't go to that stakeholder meeting. So please pass this information on. It's going to be posted publicly. Please post this and spread the word, please. And just a real real big motivational quote here. So the grid's transformative more than ever. As an industry, we need to stay agile, evolve our practices, and work together to discover creative solutions to whatever the future holds. As many of you know, what we're doing here in California is pretty unprecedented. We're putting on renewables faster than many, and many people are looking to us for answers. So it's really important that we're a big team. Whether you believe it or not, we all have a part in this big movement towards renewable energy. And it's imperative that we understand that. We're all on the same team. We're all trying to do our business. But if you guys help us, we'll help you. It's just a big collective effort, and we really appreciate it. And that's the control room. If you haven't done a overlook, that's what our control room looks like. So we have 2 control rooms, one in Folsom and one in Lincoln. They both look pretty identical. So we have 2 hot control rooms. So if you're ever back in the area, please, you can refer to see a tour. Other than that, is there any other questions?
We do have a couple in chat. Alexander Kilmer from San Diego Gas and Electric asks, very informative. I don't have any experience watching battery resources run in AGC. I knew ADS follows a 5-minute ramp, but didn't know AGC had a ramp specification. For my knowledge, is the AGC linear ramp expectation always set to 4 seconds?
So that's a good question. So the linear specification is basically when you're coming into that regulation interval, essentially. So you're not doing an instantaneous jump. The 4-second expectation, so you have a ramp rate that our AGC knows how to move in a 4-second interval. It's not gonna, our AGC also has parameters in which it will utilize that ramp rate based on where our ACE is. So I know that's kind of getting technical, but based on where our ACE is, our AGC will utilize ramp rates in different parameters. So we always use, at the 4-second linear ramp, it's more of a set point. So it's not necessarily a linear ramp in AGC. It's a 4-second set point, and it moves your resource based on your AGC ramp rate. Hopefully that answers your question. So it's a much quicker movement than a 5-minute dispatch, obviously. Next question.
The next question is from Nino Mijares from San Jose Clean Energy. Nino says, will the IFM know the resource is blocked from AS awards, even if the resource submits AS bids?
Yeah, so I'll tell you the case yesterday in which we bought back the AS. So we bought it back in the morning. It was probably around 9 o'clock in the morning. We put the real time, we'll buy back the AS right then and there, but we'll block the day ahead as well. So if you're notified that you're getting a 30-day AS buyback, then that will all be basically portrayed in the IFM market as well. So both in real time and day ahead, you will be blocked for 30 days until further notice. And you've completed that training. Hopefully that answers your question. Perfect.
There aren't any further questions in the chat at this time.
Any questions from you lucky folks that are here today? Glad to see some familiar faces here. All right, if we have no further questions, we'll be here afterwards. If you have any kind of questions that you want to direct to me personally, we can talk as well. Thank you, everybody.
Great. Thank you, Drew. We're wrapping up, and thank you so much. So for now, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap things up. If don't see Kelsey, oh, there she is, in case she wants to see some last few words. Just my last slides I have to just quickly present. We do have our upcoming Stakeholder Symposium this year, October 30th, at the Safe Credit Convention Center at Sacramento. We look forward to seeing you guys there in your organizations. And also we do have the new kaiso.com website coming late May. Those training sessions will be held on May 23rd from 9 to 10 and May 29th from 10 to 11. So just want to give everyone a shout out that. Kelsey, come up.
That's fine. Yeah, thanks, Brenda. Just wanted to say, really appreciate you guys all attending today. Thank you for your participation, especially for all those that asked questions. A few of us will be hanging around in the back, so feel free to introduce yourself. Let us know if you have any direct feedback to start with now. Please utilize those pre-COD surveys when they start coming out. We want to hear everything, you know, from metering and telemetry to any other NRI related topics. We're going to really use this and leverage it to be able to prioritize what needs improvement quickly. And we're working really closely with our customer education team to help us build modules to make this easier for everyone, because we recognize this is a very complex process and we want to make it easier and more straightforward so that we can ultimately, when we get to Drew on the grid, have things run smoother. So yeah, feel free to hang around. There's cookies if you want one, and appreciate again your guys' time today. Thank you.
All right, Silas, you can go ahead and close our call. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much to all of the speakers and all of the attendees for joining today. The call is now concluded and you may disconnect.